Corsica, an island etched into the Mediterranean like a jagged jewel, rises abruptly from the sea, its cliffs cutting into the sky, often shrouded in mist that drifts lazily over the rugged terrain. The scent of salt and pine lingers in the air, mingling with the faint traces of wild herbs and the ever-present whisper of the waves breaking against hidden coves. From a distance, Corsica appears almost serene, an untouched paradise of sun-drenched beaches and sleepy villages clinging to the mountainsides. Yet beneath this tranquil exterior lies a world steeped in history, a tapestry woven with shadows, whispers, and secrets passed down through generations. Long before the first smugglers made their way along its hidden paths, Corsica was a land shaped by survival, resilience, and an unyielding devotion to family. Its people were molded by the harshness of the island, harsh winters, scarce resources, and a rugged landscape that demanded ingenuity. Here, life was a lesson in quiet endurance. Villages were small, often isolated by steep valleys and dense forests, where every family knew the other, and every secret carried the weight of consequence. Honor was not merely a value, it was the invisible currency that governed interactions, determined loyalty, and exacted vengeance when broken. Vendettas, sometimes spanning decades, were as natural as the sea breeze, and the memory of an offense could linger quietly, like smoke curling through the narrow stone streets. It was in this environment that a particular breed of Corsican would be shaped, one adept at navigating the shadows, both literal and metaphorical. From childhood, boys and girls alike were exposed to tales of cunning, survival, and the subtle art of negotiation. Even as they learned to climb the cliffs or navigate the narrow, winding roads that connected villages, they were absorbing lessons in observation, discretion, and patience. Every conversation could carry a hidden meaning, every glance, a warning. The island demanded vigilance, teaching its children early that power often lay not in brute strength, but in intelligence, adaptability, and the ability to read human nature. By night, the island transformed. The sun dipped behind the mountains, and the villages would settle into a hush, broken only by the occasional bleat of a goat or the distant crash of waves. Under the veil of darkness, Corsica's true character emerged, the quiet intensity of people who understood both the beauty and danger of their surroundings. It was during these hours that the first smugglers began their work, moving silently along the cliffs and hidden beaches, their lanterns mere flickers against the night. They were adept at blending into the landscape, learning to move as the land itself moved, silent and patient. Every secret cove and hidden path became a part of a vast, almost invisible network that would later enable them to extend their influence far beyond the island. The island's history was not merely one of natural beauty or isolation. It was also a place where politics, law, and rebellion intersected in complex and sometimes violent ways. Corsica had long been a land contested, first by Genoese rulers, then by the French, each power attempting to impose order on a people who were fiercely independent and deeply suspicious of outsiders. This defiance became a hallmark of the Corsican character, a quiet resistance that valued autonomy and cunning over compliance. In such a setting, a smuggler was not simply a criminal, they were a practitioner of an age-old art, a continuation of a tradition that valued strategy, foresight, and discretion above all else. To succeed here, one had to be patient, observant, and willing to adapt to the shifting tides of opportunity and danger. Corsica's geography, both a curse and a blessing, shaped every aspect of life and every smuggling venture. The jagged coastline was dotted with caves and secluded beaches, perfect for concealing small boats laden with contraband. Inland, winding trails snaked through forests and valleys, often invisible from the main roads, allowing goods to move without notice. Weather played its part as well, fog rolling off the cliffs could hide movements, while sudden storms could turn a simple crossing into a treacherous test of skill and endurance. Smugglers who mastered these natural rhythms gained an almost supernatural edge, their knowledge of the land becoming as formidable as any weapon. Yet Corsica's influence extended beyond geography and tradition. Its culture, with its deep sense of loyalty and family honor, created a framework for trust and secrecy that would become essential in dealings far beyond the island. The codes of conduct, sometimes unwritten, sometimes brutally enforced, ensured that those who violated them risked far more than imprisonment. They risked losing their place in a tightly woven network that extended across the Mediterranean, from the quiet beaches of Corsica to the bustling ports of Marseille and beyond. Every step, every decision, carried the weight of history and consequence, shaping a generation of smugglers who would not only survive but thrive in the shadowed world of organized crime. It was against this backdrop that the Corsican Connection began to emerge. Long before their names were whispered in the streets of Paris or feared in the warehouses of Marseille, the earliest figures were already learning the lessons of patience, observation, and discretion. They moved through life with quiet purpose, mastering the art of invisibility, understanding that true power often lay not in confrontation, but in anticipation. They learned that the night was both a cover and a teacher, that silence could be more potent than noise, and that survival depended on a delicate balance between boldness and caution. Corsica, in essence, was more than an island. It was a crucible, a place where geography, culture, and history conspired to produce a particular kind of human, cunning, resilient, and unafraid to operate in the shadows. From the cliffs to the coves, from the villages to the dense forests, every element of the island whispered lessons in secrecy, endurance, and strategy. And it was here, in these quiet yet intense surroundings, that the smugglers who would feed the French underworld first learned to walk the line between ordinary life and legend, preparing to leave a mark on history that would echo long after the mist had lifted and the waves had calmed. In Corsica, family was not just a unit, it was the foundation of identity, a force that dictated loyalty, reputation, and survival. The island's rugged landscape had carved a people who were fiercely protective of their own, and this protection extended far beyond the walls of any single home. Families were often interconnected through generations of alliances, marriages, and shared histories, creating intricate networks that were both a source of strength and, occasionally, of conflict. From a young age, children absorbed lessons in loyalty and vigilance, understanding that every action reflected not only on themselves but on the broader reputation of their clan. A single misstep could ignite a feud that spanned decades, or, in the quietest of ways, define one's place in the shadowed corridors of power. The Corsican Code of Honor, sometimes unspoken but universally understood, emphasized respect, discretion, and retribution when necessary. These principles were instilled from childhood, not through formal education, but through observation and participation in daily life. Boys would follow fathers or uncles along mountain trails, learning how to move silently, read the land, and anticipate danger. Girls, too, absorbed subtle lessons, how to negotiate, how to manage resources, and how to maintain the dignity and safety of the household. Storytelling was a crucial part of this upbringing. Around fires in the evening, elders would recount tales of ancestors who had survived sieges, navigated treacherous waters, or outwitted enemies, imbuing the next generation with a sense of resilience and cunning. These stories, told in soft, deliberate tones, were both entertainment and education, teaching children the delicate balance between honor and survival. Vendettas, a long-standing tradition on the island, were perhaps the most vivid expression of family loyalty. A slight against one family member could reverberate for decades, shaping alliances and determining the trajectory of entire clans. In this environment, trust was sacred but fragile. Each handshake, each exchange, carried layers of meaning, and children quickly learned the importance of discernment. Who could be trusted? Who was likely to betray? How could one act without dishonoring the family yet still seize opportunity? These questions were not theoretical, they were practical considerations that shaped everyday decisions, from trading goods to choosing allies. As these children grew into adolescence, the lessons of family loyalty intertwined with the island's natural rhythms. The mountainous terrain and hidden coves demanded ingenuity. Scouts of the clans would explore secret paths, identify safe passages, and test the reliability of various routes. These excursions were not simply games, they were exercises in strategy, observation, and precision. A misjudgment could lead to injury, loss, or exposure to rival clans. Over time, these lessons formed the basis of skills that would later be invaluable in smuggling operations, patience, attention to detail, and the ability to anticipate the movements of both friends and foes. The Corsican youth also witnessed the delicate balance of power within families. Not every family member held equal influence. Authority often rested with those who demonstrated wisdom, courage, or cunning. Elders observed the behavior of younger members, noting who could be entrusted with responsibility and who was prone to impulsive action. This informal hierarchy encouraged careful observation, self-control, and strategic thinking. Even the quietest child could, over time, become a master of negotiation and strategy, provided they learned to read people and situations with precision. Life in the villages reinforced these lessons. Markets, festivals, and communal gatherings offered subtle opportunities to observe social dynamics. Children noticed how adults gauged trust, how they rewarded discretion and punished rashness. They saw how alliances shifted, sometimes suddenly, and how a simple word or gesture could change relationships overnight. These seemingly ordinary interactions were actually complex social education, teaching young Corsicans to navigate subtlety and ambiguity, a skill that would later define their ability to operate in secretive criminal networks. Yet, family was not only a source of instruction and security, it could also be a source of tension and fear. Rivalries between families could erupt over land, resources, or perceived slights, sometimes ending in bloodshed. Children grew up understanding that violence, while regrettable, was an inevitable part of maintaining honor and survival. This early exposure to both loyalty and danger cultivated a duality in their character, the ability to be loving and protective, yet strategic and wary, always conscious of the fine line between trust and betrayal. In this crucible of family, culture, and geography, certain traits became almost instinctual. Patience, observation, and discretion were rewarded, while rashness and arrogance were punished, sometimes in ways that echoed through generations. Those who mastered these traits gained not only status within the family but also the tools to navigate the broader, more dangerous world that lay beyond the island. Every lesson, every story, every whispered warning contributed to a subtle, unspoken curriculum, one that would later serve as the foundation for the Corsican Connections operations, teaching them that survival and influence were earned as much through intelligence and subtlety as through courage or force. As adolescence gave way to early adulthood, the interplay of family loyalty and ambition began to shape real-world actions. Young Corsicans who had absorbed these lessons instinctively understood the value of secrecy, the necessity of planning, and the importance of timing. They began participating in small-scale trade, learning how to move goods quietly, negotiate terms, and navigate potential conflicts with rival families. These activities were often framed as ordinary survival or economic enterprise, yet they served as early apprenticeships in smuggling and clandestine operations. The careful cultivation of trust, observation of human behavior, and strategic patience became second nature, forming the behavioral foundation that would allow them to extend influence far beyond their island homes. By the time these young men and women reached full maturity, they carried with them the weight and wisdom of generations. Their families had taught them resilience, discretion, and cunning, the land had taught them observation and adaptability, and the culture had instilled an unshakable sense of honor and survival. These qualities, honed over years of quiet observation, preparation, and participation, created individuals capable of navigating the shadows of the criminal underworld with remarkable skill. It was here, in the intimate interplay of family, culture, and environment, that the Corsican smugglers were truly forged, prepared to step onto a stage far larger than the island itself, carrying with them the lessons of centuries and the quiet, unyielding spirit of Corsica. As the young Corsicans grew older, the lessons of family, loyalty, and observation naturally evolved into practical skills. The quiet villages, hidden valleys, and rugged coastlines became both playground and classroom, shaping the earliest smugglers long before they ever left the island. It was here, in the shadows of olive groves and the hidden recesses of cliffside caves, that they learned the intricacies of moving goods undetected, reading the movements of others, and understanding the delicate balance between opportunity and risk. These early experiences, though modest in scale, would later form the foundation of operations that stretched across France and into the wider Mediterranean underworld. Nightfall was the preferred teacher. The young men, often accompanied by older relatives, would set out after dusk, navigating narrow, winding paths that only the locals knew. The moon, when it appeared, cast long, shifting shadows across the terrain, providing both guidance and cover. The smell of the sea mingled with damp earth and the faint scent of pine as they carried crates, sacks, or barrels along concealed routes. Each step required patience, each movement measured and deliberate, for the faintest sound could betray their presence. It was a delicate dance between motion and stillness, teaching them to be acutely aware of their environment, to anticipate obstacles, and to respond to sudden changes with calm efficiency. The goods themselves were often modest at first, salt, wine, or small contraband items that could be moved quickly and quietly. The thrill of the exchange, combined with the tension of evading detection, taught these young Corsicans both confidence and caution. They learned to assess risk in real time, which routes were safe, which allies were trustworthy, and when it was necessary to retreat into the darkness. Over time, these seemingly simple smuggling trips became exercises in strategy, endurance, and psychological acuity. Every successful mission reinforced the lessons of patience, attention to detail, and discretion that had been instilled from childhood. Trust was paramount, and yet it was always fragile. The island's culture of honor and vendetta meant that alliances could be both powerful and precarious. Even within extended families, loyalty was expected, but one misstep could jeopardize relationships and long-term security. Young smugglers were trained to observe subtle cues, hesitations, changes in tone, fleeting gestures, that might indicate unreliability or hidden motives. This constant vigilance became second nature, a quiet skill honed through repetition and necessity. In the world of smuggling, as in life, information was as valuable as any weapon, and knowing when to act and when to remain still could determine survival. As experience grew, so did the complexity of operations. Simple exchanges on hidden beaches evolved into coordinated efforts involving multiple participants, diversions, and timing that needed to be flawless. Smugglers would hide goods in caves, behind rocks, or under layers of nets, creating a labyrinth of concealment that only they could navigate. They learned the subtle art of misdirection, leaving false trails, staging decoys, and communicating silently through gestures and coded phrases. Each successful operation reinforced both confidence and caution, teaching that intelligence and planning were far more effective than brute force. The environment itself was an unforgiving yet patient mentor. Harsh winters could make the cliffs slippery, storms could turn calm waters into dangerous torrents, and sudden fog could erase all visibility. Every natural obstacle was a lesson in adaptation. Young Corsicans discovered that timing was crucial, that understanding weather patterns, tides, and terrain could mean the difference between success and failure. These experiences built not only skill but also a quiet resilience, an ability to remain calm under pressure, and a respect for forces beyond human control. By adolescence, these experiences began to attract attention. Older smugglers recognized potential in those who moved silently, observed keenly, and executed tasks with precision. Mentorship emerged naturally, with seasoned operators guiding the next generation through more complex smuggling tasks. They learned to handle more valuable or riskier contraband, cigarettes, rare spirits, or luxury goods, while maintaining the same meticulous care. The stakes grew, as did the rewards, teaching lessons not just in trade but in negotiation, discretion, and the unspoken hierarchy of the underworld. The moral landscape of these young smugglers was subtle and complex. On one hand, they were engaging in illegal activities, on the other, their work was embedded within a culture that valued cunning, honor, and resourcefulness. There was a rhythm to these nocturnal operations, a silent choreography of movement, observation, and calculated risk that fostered a unique mindset. Success was not measured solely by profit, but by the ability to anticipate, adapt, and outmaneuver potential threats, human, environmental, or institutional. It was a world where the quietest individual, the one most observant and patient, often wielded the greatest influence. Alongside skill and strategy, they developed a profound understanding of secrecy. Every smuggler quickly realized that what was not said could be as important as what was spoken. Plans, routes, and alliances were guarded carefully, with trust extended only gradually. This discretion became instinctive. Over time, the young smugglers internalized the necessity of blending into everyday life, appearing as ordinary villagers by day while orchestrating clandestine operations by night. Their dual existence trained them to be both invisible and influential, a combination that would serve them well in their expansion beyond Corsica. Perhaps most importantly, these early experiences instilled a sense of patience and timing that was crucial for survival. They learned to wait for the right moment to move, to strike, or to retreat. The world of smuggling was not about impulsive action, it was about anticipation, calculation, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing the land, the people, and the rhythm of night. Each success reinforced their sense of self, while each misstep, whether caught by the natural world or human oversight, taught humility and the need for continuous vigilance. By the time these Corsican youths reached adulthood, they were no longer simply villagers or children of the cliffs. They had become adept navigators of both terrain and human behavior, quietly mastering the techniques, strategies, and psychological awareness that would allow them to thrive in the larger criminal world. Their early experiences had honed not only practical skill but also the mindset of patience, observation, and subtlety, qualities that distinguished a successful smuggler from a careless adventurer. They had learned to live within the shadows, to anticipate dangers, and to operate with a measured calm that masked an extraordinary intelligence. And so, the foundation was laid. What began as youthful exploration and family-guided lessons evolved into the first true smuggling apprenticeships. Each journey across hidden paths, each secretive exchange along the moonlit coast, and each carefully observed behavior contributed to the making of a new generation of Corsican operators. These young men and women were quietly preparing to extend their reach beyond the island, to bring the skills and traditions of Corsica into the larger, more dangerous, and more lucrative world of the French underworld. As the Corsican smugglers matured in skill and cunning, their ambitions quietly outgrew the confines of the island. Corsica, with all its hidden coves and shadowed mountain paths, had taught them patience, observation, and discretion, yet the lure of the mainland, the bustling ports, the sprawling cities, and the promises of wealth, was irresistible. Crossing from the familiar cliffs and forests into France was not simply a matter of geography, it was a venture into a world of complex social networks, sophisticated criminals, and a far more intricate underworld. The move required strategy, patience, and the kind of meticulous planning that had been nurtured in them since childhood. The initial steps were cautious and deliberate. Small boats, often disguised among fishing vessels, carried crates of goods across the Mediterranean under the cover of darkness. The night air was dense with salt and the faint hum of distant engines, and the smugglers had to time their journeys precisely, using the rhythm of the tides and the moon to guide them. Even a minor miscalculation could result in exposure to coast guards, rival gangs, or unpredictable weather. Each voyage across the waters demanded more than physical skill, it required foresight, careful observation, and an intimate understanding of human nature, qualities that had been cultivated on Corsica's rugged terrain. The arrival on the French mainland brought a stark contrast. Where Corsica had offered isolation and control, cities like Marseille and Paris were a maze of streets, alleys, and human activity, pulsating with energy and opportunity. The underworld there was structured yet chaotic, populated by experienced criminals who had long since learned the art of negotiation, deception, and strategic violence. For the Corsicans, entering this space was akin to stepping onto a chessboard with unseen opponents. Every interaction, every handshake, and every casual remark carried potential consequences. Their ability to read people, discern intentions, and maintain discretion became their greatest asset, just as it had on the cliffs of their home island. Early contacts on the mainland were often brokers, small-time traders, or intermediaries who recognized the value of Corsican expertise. The newcomers brought not only smuggling skills but also a reputation forged in secrecy, patience, and discipline, qualities that mainland criminals both respected and feared. These initial alliances were tentative, formed slowly, and maintained through subtle demonstrations of reliability and skill. The Corsicans had learned that trust was fragile and that a single misstep could end an opportunity before it truly began. Patience and consistency, rather than bold action, became the currency with which they navigated these new networks. Marseille, in particular, became a key gateway for expansion. The port city, alive with ships from across Europe and beyond, was both chaotic and strategically valuable. Hidden docks and warehouses offered perfect locations for discreet transfers, while the bustling streets and diverse population provided cover for movement and communication. The Corsicans adapted quickly, blending into the rhythm of city life while quietly establishing routes, contacts, and storage points. Their operations were methodical and understated, executed with a calm efficiency that drew attention only when absolutely necessary. In this way, they maintained the advantage of invisibility while steadily increasing their influence. Yet life on the mainland was not without its dangers. Rival gangs were entrenched, and even a minor transgression or misstep could provoke conflict. The Corsicans had to navigate both overt and covert threats, understanding that power was not simply about brute strength but also about intelligence, timing, and strategic alliances. They learned to anticipate moves, to spot subtle signs of betrayal, and to negotiate with a careful balance of firmness and diplomacy. Every decision carried risk, yet every successful maneuver reinforced their growing reputation as reliable, shrewd, and dangerous operators. Cultural adaptation was equally important. The Corsicans were outsiders, and to operate successfully, they needed to understand the social codes, unspoken rules, and political dynamics of each city. They observed, listened, and absorbed, much as they had in their youth, turning the mainland into a second classroom. From observing the behavior of law enforcement to understanding the competitive rivalries between gangs, they developed a sophisticated awareness of the environment. Their previous experience on the island, moving silently, assessing risk, and anticipating human behavior, proved invaluable, allowing them to integrate seamlessly into the urban underworld without drawing undue attention. Expansion also required subtle innovation. The smugglers adapted their island techniques to urban conditions, modifying routes, concealment methods, and communication strategies to suit the complex infrastructure of cities. Hidden compartments in delivery vehicles replaced the small boats of their youth, secret codes and signals allowed discreet coordination, and new alliances with local criminals created opportunities for controlled expansion. Each adaptation was measured and deliberate, reflecting the same careful planning and attention to detail that had been cultivated in the hidden coves of Corsica. Despite the apparent calm of their operations, tension always lingered beneath the surface. The stakes were higher, the rivals more experienced, and the consequences of failure far more severe. Yet, the Corsicans moved with a quiet confidence, their previous training in patience, observation, and strategic discretion allowing them to navigate this new world without panic. Each success, each carefully executed transfer or negotiation, built a foundation for influence and respect that extended far beyond their initial foothold. They were slowly becoming integral players in the French underworld, their presence quiet but unmistakable. The transition from island to mainland also marked a psychological shift. The smugglers had moved from a world where loyalty and reputation were personal and intimate to one where they operated on multiple levels, balancing obligations to family, clan, and criminal associates across a far broader terrain. This required not only skill and patience but also emotional resilience, the ability to remain calm under constant observation and pressure. They learned to trust their instincts, to rely on subtle signals, and to maintain an unshakable composure, traits that would define the Corsican Connection for decades to come. As they established themselves, the Corsicans began to understand the scale of opportunity before them. The mainland offered a vast, interconnected network of markets, contacts, and resources, all of which could be leveraged with the right combination of patience, skill, and discretion. The lessons of Corsica, the importance of observation, the value of secrecy, and the primacy of patience, remained at the core of their operations, guiding every decision, every movement, and every alliance. Slowly but surely, the Corsicans were not just surviving, they were beginning to thrive, laying the groundwork for a powerful, shadowed empire that would quietly dominate aspects of the French underworld for years to come. As the Corsican smugglers established themselves on the mainland, they quickly realized that survival and success were not determined solely by skill or daring, but by the careful cultivation of relationships. In the quiet, shadowed corridors of Marseille's port warehouses and the dimly lit backstreets of Paris, alliances could be as valuable as contraband, and betrayal was never far from the surface. Every handshake, every casual exchange, carried weight. Navigating this delicate balance between trust and suspicion became an art in itself, one that the Corsicans had learned instinctively on their home island but now had to adapt to a far more complex environment. Early on, the smugglers discovered the necessity of selecting allies with precision. Not every criminal on the mainland could be trusted, and a single miscalculation could threaten an entire operation. The Corsicans observed, listened, and waited, letting others reveal their intentions through subtle cues, hesitations, glances, the inflection of a voice. Patience was key. Rushing into partnerships without understanding the underlying dynamics could prove disastrous. They had learned long ago that true power often lay not in bold action but in restraint, in knowing when to advance and when to hold back. In this way, alliances were not formed impulsively, but with careful consideration, ensuring that each relationship strengthened rather than weakened their growing influence. The formation of these alliances was often a slow, understated process. Small favors, discreet assistance, and silent demonstrations of reliability gradually built trust. A Corsican might help a French associate navigate a difficult smuggling route or discreetly mediate a dispute without seeking recognition. These gestures, subtle yet meaningful, allowed the newcomers to establish themselves as dependable and competent partners. Their reputation for discretion, patience, and skill preceded them, opening doors that might have remained closed to others. Gradually, the Corsicans carved out a niche for themselves, becoming indispensable yet enigmatic participants in the mainland underworld. Yet alongside these alliances, enemies inevitably emerged. Rival gangs, local operators, and even former allies could perceive the growing influence of the Corsicans as a threat. Conflicts often simmered in silence, manifesting in coded warnings, veiled threats, or sudden acts of aggression. Every interaction carried the potential for tension, and the ability to anticipate and defuse conflict became as crucial as any physical skill. The Corsicans relied on careful observation, leveraging their understanding of human behavior to navigate these dangers without drawing unnecessary attention. In this world, foresight was as powerful as force, and patience often proved more effective than confrontation. Trust, however, was not simply a matter of social calculation, it was also deeply tied to cultural understanding. The Corsicans brought with them the lessons of family, loyalty, and honor that had been instilled from childhood. They understood the unspoken codes that governed both their own networks and those of their new allies, using this knowledge to negotiate complex relationships. Demonstrating reliability and discretion was essential, but so was recognizing the value of subtlety and timing in human interaction. By adhering to these principles, the Corsicans could maintain delicate balances, ensuring that alliances were mutually beneficial while minimizing exposure to treachery. The stakes of these alliances extended far beyond social niceties. Access to resources, routes, and intelligence often depended on the strength of connections. A well-placed ally could provide information about law enforcement movements, rival operations, or opportunities for lucrative transfers of goods. Conversely, a misjudged relationship could lead to exposure, theft, or even violence. The Corsicans became adept at mapping these networks mentally, identifying key figures, potential allies, and possible threats, constantly reassessing and recalibrating as situations evolved. Their early training on the island, in observation, discretion, and strategic patience, proved invaluable in this intricate social landscape. Navigating these relationships required more than skill, it required emotional intelligence. The Corsicans learned to read not only actions but emotions, understanding the subtle cues that revealed motives, anxieties, and loyalties. A slight hesitation, a flicker of hesitation in an eye, or the tone of a voice could indicate a brewing problem long before it became overt. By tuning into these signals, they were able to adjust their strategies, avoiding unnecessary risk while strengthening beneficial connections. This emotional acuity became a cornerstone of their operations, allowing them to move with confidence through a complex and often dangerous social ecosystem. As their network expanded, so too did their influence. Allies could introduce them to new contacts, provide safe houses, or facilitate the movement of larger and more valuable shipments. The Corsicans began to see the importance of building layered relationships, where trust and dependence were reciprocal. By creating webs of connection, they ensured that their operations could continue even in the face of disruption or betrayal. Each alliance became a strand in an increasingly resilient structure, supporting both security and growth. It was a quiet, methodical accumulation of power, executed with the same patience and discretion that had characterized their early smuggling activities on Corsica. The process of alliance building was not without tension. Even the most carefully constructed relationships could be tested by opportunity, greed, or shifting circumstances. Corsicans observed carefully, weighing every action and assessing every intention, learning to navigate subtle conflicts without creating open confrontation. Sometimes, the best strategy was to step back, allowing situations to unfold while maintaining readiness to intervene if necessary. This measured approach allowed them to maintain credibility and influence while minimizing exposure to risk, reinforcing their growing reputation as thoughtful, strategic, and reliable operators. Through these alliances and careful management of enemies, the Corsicans began to weave themselves into the fabric of the French underworld. Their skill, patience, and discretion earned respect and occasional fear, yet they remained quiet figures, operating largely from the shadows. This ability to integrate seamlessly while maintaining independence was essential, allowing them to expand their operations without drawing undue attention. Slowly, deliberately, they built a network that was both resilient and adaptable, grounded in the same principles that had guided them from childhood: observation, patience, loyalty, and strategic foresight. By the time their mainland operations were firmly established, the Corsicans had mastered a delicate art, the art of survival and influence in a world where trust was scarce, betrayal common, and stakes extraordinarily high. They had learned that true power lay not in reckless boldness but in the patient cultivation of alliances, the careful navigation of rivalries, and the quiet accumulation of respect. Each relationship, each subtle negotiation, each demonstration of skill contributed to the growing web of influence that would define the Corsican Connection. It was a slow, deliberate, and highly disciplined ascent, one that would ensure their survival and dominance in the shadowed world of the French underworld for years to come. As the Corsican smugglers' mainland operations matured, the scope of their ambitions quietly expanded. No longer satisfied with small-scale transfers or isolated shipments, they began exploring the potential of controlling entire supply chains. The French underworld was a complex ecosystem, with multiple layers of trade, distribution, and enforcement. To thrive, they needed not only skill and discretion but also a deep understanding of the mechanisms by which goods, information, and influence flowed. What had started as discreet smuggling along hidden beaches now evolved into an intricate orchestration of people, routes, and timing, each piece meticulously calculated to minimize risk and maximize profit. Control over logistics became the first step toward establishing authority. The Corsicans carefully mapped the movement of goods across Marseille, Paris, and other key ports, identifying vulnerabilities in rival operations and opportunities for expansion. They observed patterns: which docks were lightly monitored, which routes allowed for undetected travel, which intermediaries were reliable and which prone to compromise. Every shipment, no matter how minor, became an exercise in strategy, observation, and subtle negotiation. It was not enough to move goods from point A to point B, success required anticipating the movements of competitors, law enforcement, and even the whims of nature itself. The physical aspects of their operations were equally demanding. Hidden warehouses were established in inconspicuous locations, sometimes behind the facades of legitimate businesses, other times in abandoned buildings or quiet suburban neighborhoods. Goods were concealed in ways that reflected a profound understanding of both human psychology and environmental conditions. False compartments, disguised containers, and cleverly timed transfers ensured that shipments could move undetected. Each innovation, while practical, was also a subtle statement. The Corsicans were not mere opportunists, they were meticulous planners, masters of precision and foresight. Alongside logistics, the Corsicans developed increasingly sophisticated methods of communication. In a world where information could be both a lifeline and a liability, they needed to ensure that messages traveled safely and discreetly. Simple couriers, once adequate, were supplemented with coded signals, prearranged drop points, and subtle verbal or written cues that could pass unnoticed by outsiders. Even the smallest detail, like the placement of a crate, the direction of a symbol on a wall, or the time of a signal, could convey critical information without ever being spoken aloud. Through these measures, the Corsicans maintained both secrecy and control, allowing operations to proceed smoothly even across multiple cities and collaborators. Risk management became an essential discipline. The Corsicans understood that any operation, no matter how well planned, could encounter unforeseen challenges. Law enforcement inspections, rival interference, or unexpected environmental obstacles could all disrupt the flow of goods. They built contingency plans into every aspect of their network, from hidden alternative routes to emergency protocols for key personnel. In essence, they created a flexible, resilient system that could absorb shocks without collapsing. This foresight set them apart from many other operators, who relied more on luck or brute force than careful preparation and adaptability. The human dimension of control was equally critical. Maintaining loyalty among associates required more than payment, it demanded respect, careful attention, and the cultivation of mutual dependency. The Corsicans leveraged both personal relationships and subtle incentives to ensure reliability. Those who demonstrated skill, discretion, and loyalty were quietly rewarded with greater responsibilities, access to more lucrative shipments, and inclusion in strategic decision-making. Conversely, any sign of unreliability was noted, with potential consequences ranging from reassignment to exclusion from critical operations. This careful management of human resources reinforced both discipline and trust, ensuring that the network could function efficiently and with minimal exposure. Competition, however, was relentless. Rival gangs, established local criminals, and opportunistic outsiders constantly tested the Corsicans' control. Skirmishes over territory, attempts to intercept shipments, and covert espionage were common. Each challenge demanded a blend of tactical skill, psychological acuity, and strategic patience. The Corsicans had learned on Corsica that confrontation was often less effective than observation and calculated action. By anticipating rivals' moves and using misdirection, subtle negotiation, or carefully timed interventions, they maintained their advantage while minimizing unnecessary conflict. This ability to neutralize threats without drawing undue attention became a hallmark of their operations. The scale of operations required not only skill but also adaptability. As shipments grew larger and the network more complex, logistical challenges multiplied. The Corsicans had to coordinate multiple teams across different locations, ensuring synchronization in timing, method, and communication. Each successful operation reinforced confidence, but it also highlighted the need for continuous vigilance. They developed a culture of meticulous review, analyzing successes and failures alike to refine methods and improve efficiency. This commitment to learning, adaptation, and continuous improvement ensured that their network remained robust even in a dynamic and often hostile environment. Financial management became an increasingly important aspect of their operations. Profits were carefully calculated, allocated not only to compensate personnel but also to reinvest in infrastructure, secure safe houses, and bribe key intermediaries when necessary. The Corsicans understood that wealth alone was insufficient. It had to be strategically deployed to protect and expand influence. Investments in secrecy, transportation, and communication were prioritized, ensuring that the system as a whole functioned smoothly and remained resilient against both external threats and internal errors. Psychological strategy complemented every practical step. The Corsicans cultivated an aura of reliability, competence, and subtle intimidation. By projecting quiet confidence and measured control, they influenced both allies and competitors. Allies were reassured, rivals were cautious, and observers underestimated their true reach. This blend of practical skill and psychological insight allowed them to maintain dominance without resorting to unnecessary violence, emphasizing strategy over chaos. Ultimately, this phase marked the transformation of the Corsican smugglers from skilled operators into true strategists. Their work was no longer limited to individual shipments or isolated acts of smuggling. It had become a comprehensive, integrated network of logistics, relationships, and influence. Each layer, routes, warehouses, communication systems, personnel management, risk assessment, and financial oversight, was carefully orchestrated to create a resilient, efficient, and adaptive enterprise. The lessons of Corsica, patience, observation, discretion, and loyalty, were now amplified and applied on a far grander scale, allowing the Corsican Connection to solidify its position as a formidable force within the French underworld. The gradual expansion of control also created a sense of inevitability. Each operation, each careful maneuver, reinforced the idea that the Corsicans were not merely participants in the underworld but were shaping its very structure. They had moved from small-scale smugglers to architects of a system that could endure scrutiny, pressure, and challenge. The mastery of logistics, alliances, and strategy positioned them not only to survive but to thrive, setting the stage for a period of influence and dominance that would define their legacy in the shadowed world of organized crime. As the Corsican Connection grew in both scale and reputation, the smugglers began to understand that control over goods and routes was only part of the equation. Influence in the underworld was equally shaped by intelligence, information about rivals, law enforcement movements, and potential opportunities. In the quiet hours of early mornings or late nights, the Corsicans would meet discreetly in shadowed alleys, secluded cafés, or back rooms of otherwise unremarkable establishments, sharing observations, rumors, and carefully verified intelligence. These sessions, conducted with meticulous attention to discretion, allowed them to stay ahead of rivals and law enforcement alike, transforming raw skill into strategic foresight. The acquisition and management of information became an art form. Observing rival operations required patience and subtlety. A glance, a shadow, a sudden absence in a familiar location could indicate movement, preparation, or even conflict. Corsicans trained in observation since childhood now applied these skills to monitor warehouses, docks, and street-level activities without ever being noticed. Each piece of information, no matter how minor it seemed, was catalogued mentally, contributing to a constantly evolving map of opportunities and risks. The island's lessons in patience and discretion proved invaluable, allowing them to detect patterns and anticipate developments before others could react. Alliances were also fortified through intelligence. Trusted allies could provide tips, share observations, or relay messages that were critical to operational success. The Corsicans cultivated these relationships carefully, rewarding loyalty and competence while quietly distancing themselves from unreliable contacts. By sharing information selectively, they ensured that allies remained useful while minimizing exposure. This careful calibration of trust allowed them to maintain a network that was both cohesive and flexible, able to respond to changes without losing stability. Knowledge, it became clear, was both power and protection. The flow of intelligence was not always straightforward. Disinformation, deliberate misdirection, and the natural chaos of human activity could obscure truth. The Corsicans had to learn to sift signal from noise, to recognize patterns within apparent randomness, and to weigh the credibility of sources. This analytical approach was reinforced through experience. Each operation, each interaction, offered new insights into human behavior and the mechanics of the underworld. Over time, the Corsicans developed an almost intuitive sense for risk assessment, able to predict rival movements, identify potential ambushes, and exploit vulnerabilities with precision. Beyond observation, the Corsicans understood the importance of subtle influence. In interactions with both allies and rivals, they practiced a measured form of persuasion, using calm demeanor, reputation, and timing to guide decisions without overt confrontation. A well-placed suggestion, a moment of silence, or an understated demonstration of competence could shift the behavior of others in ways that were almost imperceptible. These psychological tactics allowed the Corsicans to expand their control without unnecessary violence, creating a network of influence that was as much mental as it was logistical. Their presence was felt even when they remained unseen, a quiet authority grounded in strategy rather than intimidation. Risk management intertwined naturally with intelligence operations. Knowledge allowed the Corsicans to anticipate threats, whether from rival gangs or law enforcement. They could adjust routes, alter schedules, or redirect shipments in response to subtle cues, reducing exposure and increasing efficiency. This proactive approach distinguished them from less disciplined operators who relied on luck or brute force. The Corsicans had learned that preparation, foresight, and the careful management of uncertainty were far more reliable than reactive measures. In essence, they transformed information into both shield and sword. The Corsicans also applied their intelligence operations to negotiation and alliance building. Understanding the motivations, fears, and ambitions of potential partners allowed them to structure deals that were mutually beneficial yet subtly advantageous to themselves. By anticipating objections and gauging willingness, they could navigate complex interactions with minimal risk. This combination of observation, analysis, and interpersonal skill reinforced their reputation as capable and reliable operators, creating a network in which trust and loyalty were carefully managed assets. Surveillance, a crucial element of intelligence, was conducted with remarkable subtlety. Corsicans often positioned themselves in plain sight, appearing as ordinary pedestrians or customers while observing the flow of goods and people. They relied on the smallest details, the timing of a guard's rounds, the placement of a crate, the rhythm of dock activity, to gain insights that others overlooked. Their ability to remain unobtrusive while gathering critical information became a defining feature of their operations, allowing them to act decisively while avoiding detection or confrontation. Information also became a tool for anticipation. By monitoring movements, behaviors, and interactions, the Corsicans could predict conflicts, opportunities, and vulnerabilities. This predictive capability was not infallible, but it provided a significant advantage, allowing them to act proactively rather than reactively. In a world where a single misstep could have dire consequences, this foresight was a form of protection, ensuring that they could navigate uncertainty with confidence and precision. The psychological impact of their intelligence operations extended beyond strategy. Allies trusted them, rivals respected or feared them, and their growing reputation for foresight and calm authority created an aura that enhanced influence without visible force. The Corsicans' mastery of observation, analysis, and subtle manipulation allowed them to operate within the underworld with a remarkable combination of discretion and control. Each successful operation, each well-timed decision, reinforced their standing and solidified the foundations of a network that was resilient, adaptive, and enduring. Ultimately, this phase of their growth marked a shift from operational skill to strategic mastery. The Corsicans were no longer simply smugglers, they had become architects of influence, capable of shaping events, preempting threats, and directing outcomes across a sprawling criminal ecosystem. Intelligence became the lifeblood of their operations, transforming every shipment, every alliance, and every interaction into part of a carefully orchestrated plan. By combining observation, analysis, subtle persuasion, and risk management, the Corsican Connection established itself not only as a powerful force in smuggling but as a quietly commanding presence within the French underworld. In this way, the Corsicans' operations matured from physical smuggling to a sophisticated enterprise in which information, influence, and strategy were as vital as any hidden cargo. Their network became an interlocking system of observation, coordination, and anticipation, allowing them to move confidently in a world where one misstep could mean exposure, loss, or worse. Patience, discretion, and insight, qualities cultivated from childhood on the rugged cliffs of Corsica, were now amplified, shaping a generation of operators capable of quiet, enduring dominance. The connection between Corsica and the mainland was no longer merely geographic, it was strategic, psychological, and operational, forming the foundation of an underworld empire built on foresight and subtlety. By the time the Corsican Connection had firmly established its foothold on the mainland, the smuggling operations had evolved far beyond the discreet nighttime crossings and hidden coves that marked their early days. The network had matured into a sophisticated enterprise, capable of moving significant volumes of contraband with a precision that rivaled legitimate businesses. Yet, as their operational capacity grew, so too did the challenges. The larger the operation, the greater the scrutiny, from rival gangs, law enforcement, and even the casual eyes of those who might stumble upon their activities. Success required constant vigilance, careful planning, and an unwavering adherence to the principles that had guided them from Corsica: patience, observation, and discretion. With growth came specialization. Each member of the Corsican network developed expertise in a particular aspect of the enterprise. Some focused on logistics, ensuring that shipments moved smoothly across complex routes and that contingencies were in place for every eventuality. Others became masters of communication and coordination, devising subtle codes, pre-arranged signals, and drop points that allowed information to flow securely and efficiently. Still others honed the art of negotiation, cultivating relationships with allies and managing delicate alliances in ways that maximized advantage while minimizing risk. Each specialist operated like a cog in a well-oiled machine, their efforts synchronized to create a system that was remarkably resilient and adaptable. The coordination of multiple shipments across different regions required unprecedented levels of planning. Timing became everything. A delay in one city could cascade into exposure or loss in another. The Corsicans relied on their deep understanding of geography, tides, and infrastructure, developed over years of island training and urban adaptation, to plan each movement with meticulous care. Hidden caches, false compartments, and carefully chosen routes ensured that goods could move without detection. Even the smallest details, the weight of a crate, the placement of a marking, the timing of a courier's arrival, were carefully calculated, reflecting a level of precision that elevated their operations from simple smuggling to strategic orchestration. Yet, while physical logistics were critical, the human dimension remained equally vital. Maintaining loyalty and trust among members and allies required constant attention. Rewards, recognition, and responsibility were distributed with discretion, ensuring that competence and reliability were encouraged. Conversely, errors, disloyalty, or recklessness were noted and addressed quietly but firmly, reinforcing the importance of discipline. This careful management of people allowed the Corsicans to maintain a network that was both cohesive and flexible, able to respond to threats or opportunities without compromising the integrity of the enterprise. As their reputation grew, so too did the awareness of rival organizations. Competition in the underworld was fierce, and the Corsicans were acutely aware that expansion invited both envy and aggression. Skirmishes over territory, attempts to intercept shipments, and subtle acts of sabotage were constant threats. Yet the Corsicans approached these challenges with the same calm, methodical strategy that had guided their operations from the beginning. Observation, anticipation, and careful intervention allowed them to neutralize threats before they escalated, maintaining dominance without drawing unnecessary attention or provoking open conflict. Their ability to act decisively, often without visible force, earned them a quiet respect among allies and competitors alike. The Corsicans also became adept at leveraging indirect influence. By cultivating strategic relationships with local officials, dock workers, and peripheral players, they could subtly shape outcomes without direct confrontation. Bribes, favors, and discreet alliances ensured that shipments moved smoothly and that potential obstacles were managed before they became critical. This blend of practical skill and psychological insight reinforced their position, allowing them to maintain an operational edge while remaining largely invisible to outside scrutiny. Every interaction, no matter how minor, was considered and calculated to maximize long-term stability and advantage. Innovation played a key role in maintaining control. As law enforcement and rival gangs adapted to traditional methods, the Corsicans continually refined techniques for concealment, transportation, and communication. They experimented with new routes, hidden compartments, and coded messages, constantly testing and adjusting to ensure effectiveness. Each innovation, while subtle, strengthened the resilience of their network and enhanced operational security. Over time, these innovations became second nature, part of a disciplined culture in which efficiency, discretion, and foresight were paramount. The psychological aspect of their expansion cannot be understated. The Corsicans cultivated an aura of quiet authority, projecting competence, calm, and control. This reputation influenced the behavior of both allies and rivals. Allies were reassured by the Corsicans' reliability, while competitors approached cautiously, aware of the strategic acumen that lay beneath a composed exterior. This subtle dominance allowed them to expand influence without resorting to overt violence, creating a network that was respected and, in some cases, feared for its efficiency and discretion rather than its brutality. Despite their successes, challenges persisted. The expansion of operations increased the complexity of coordination, the risk of exposure, and the potential for betrayal. Every shipment, every interaction, and every decision required careful consideration. The Corsicans relied on rigorous observation, detailed planning, and an instinctive understanding of human behavior to navigate these risks. Each challenge was met with patience and strategy, reinforcing the disciplined approach that had defined their operations from the beginning. Success was measured not only in profits but in stability, resilience, and the ability to anticipate and adapt to evolving circumstances. The integration of multiple cities, routes, and players marked a turning point. The Corsican Connection was no longer merely a network of smugglers, it had become a sophisticated enterprise capable of exerting influence across the French underworld. Their operations were synchronized, resilient, and adaptive, reflecting a careful balance of logistics, intelligence, human management, and strategic foresight. The lessons of Corsica, patience, observation, discretion, and loyalty, were now amplified on a continental scale, forming the foundation of a network that would endure scrutiny, competition, and the pressures of an increasingly complex criminal landscape. Through this careful expansion, the Corsicans demonstrated that true power in the underworld was measured not by violence alone but by control, subtlety, and intelligence. By mastering logistics, human relationships, and strategic foresight, they transformed from skilled smugglers into architects of influence. Their operations became an interlocking system, capable of enduring disruption and adapting to changing conditions while maintaining efficiency and security. The Corsican Connection had evolved into a force defined as much by mental acuity and careful orchestration as by traditional notions of criminal power, setting the stage for its enduring dominance in the shadowed world of French organized crime. As the Corsican Connection cemented its presence across mainland France, the complexity of its operations brought new challenges, particularly in dealing with law enforcement. Unlike the quiet vigilance required on the island or the careful negotiation of rivals in Marseille's docks, interacting with the authorities demanded a different kind of strategy, one that combined patience, subtlety, and psychological insight. The Corsicans quickly learned that evasion was not merely about hiding goods or avoiding patrols, it was about understanding the mindset of those tasked with enforcing the law and exploiting gaps in their procedures without raising suspicion. Observation remained their most vital tool. Dockside inspections, border checks, and local police routines were meticulously studied. Corsicans would spend days, sometimes weeks, observing patterns, the times at which officers were least attentive, the routes least monitored, and the points where paperwork was cursory rather than rigorous. These observations, recorded mentally with near photographic precision, allowed smugglers to time movements perfectly, ensuring that shipments arrived safely while appearing mundane and lawful. The mastery of such subtlety transformed each interaction into a calculated maneuver, a blend of patience and audacity. Beyond observation, deception became an art form. Simple concealment of contraband evolved into complex subterfuge. Crates would be labeled as ordinary goods, documents forged to appear legitimate, and shipments split across multiple vehicles to reduce risk. Each tactic was designed not to confront authority but to make scrutiny unnecessary, invisible to the untrained eye. The Corsicans understood that the best way to avoid detection was often to appear as ordinary citizens, blending seamlessly into the fabric of urban and maritime life. This quiet camouflage became a signature of their operations, allowing them to function with remarkable efficiency despite the constant risk of exposure. The psychological component of interaction with law enforcement was equally critical. Corsicans cultivated an air of confidence and normalcy, ensuring that officers and inspectors never suspected the significance of their actions. A calm demeanor, courteous exchanges, and subtle attention to detail created a perception of legitimacy. Even when subjected to casual questioning, their behavior was measured, avoiding sudden movements or signs of nervousness. Over time, this quiet composure became second nature, a learned instinct that allowed them to navigate potentially perilous situations with minimal risk. Bribery and influence were used selectively and strategically. The Corsicans recognized that not every officer could be persuaded, and that indiscriminate payments could draw attention or create vulnerability. Instead, they identified key individuals whose cooperation or inattentiveness could provide long-term benefit, establishing discreet arrangements that reinforced operational security. These arrangements were never ostentatious, rather, they were carefully managed relationships based on subtle incentives and mutual advantage. In this way, the Corsicans extended their control without overt confrontation, relying on influence rather than force to maintain smooth operations. Surveillance and counter-surveillance became intertwined with these strategies. The Corsicans would often monitor authorities as closely as they monitored rival operators, learning the habits, routines, and blind spots of those charged with enforcement. By understanding these patterns, they could adjust shipment schedules, modify routes, and even anticipate inspections. In essence, law enforcement became another variable in the strategic calculations of the network, a dynamic element to be observed, studied, and subtly manipulated rather than a static threat to be feared. Each encounter with authorities reinforced the importance of discipline and preparation. Mistakes, no matter how minor, could have severe consequences. A misidentified crate, a careless comment, or a momentary lapse in composure could trigger investigations or compromise an operation. The Corsicans responded by institutionalizing a culture of meticulous care. Every shipment was checked, every document verified, and every route rehearsed mentally to ensure flawless execution. Over time, this discipline became ingrained, a reflection of the training and experience that had shaped them since their early days on Corsica. The combination of observation, deception, and psychological strategy created a dual-layered shield. On one level, goods moved undetected, shipments reached their destinations, and operations ran smoothly. On another, the Corsicans cultivated an intangible aura of competence and caution, influencing both allies and authorities to view them as organized, reliable, and unremarkable in appearance, even when they were anything but. This balance between visibility and invisibility became a hallmark of their operations, allowing them to expand while minimizing the risk of exposure or disruption. Yet, even as they mastered evasion, the Corsicans remained aware of the broader consequences of law enforcement pressure. An isolated incident could escalate if mismanaged, potentially triggering investigations that extended beyond a single shipment or city. They therefore maintained contingency plans, including alternative routes, redundant safe houses, and discrete communication channels. These preparations ensured that the network could absorb disruptions and maintain operational continuity, a level of resilience that distinguished the Corsican Connection from less disciplined or opportunistic operators. Ultimately, the interplay with law enforcement reinforced the Corsicans' reliance on intellect and patience over brute force. Each encounter, whether casual or potentially threatening, was approached as part of a larger strategic framework. Observation, planning, discretion, and subtle influence combined to create a system in which risk was minimized and control was maximized. By mastering the art of evasion not through confrontation but through insight and careful calculation, the Corsican Connection secured its operations and strengthened its position within the complex, shadowed world of French organized crime. This phase of their operations also highlighted the psychological sophistication of the Corsicans. They learned to anticipate not only the movements of authorities but the thought processes behind them, predicting likely actions and planning accordingly. By treating law enforcement as an element of strategy rather than an external threat, they transformed vulnerability into an opportunity for precision, demonstrating that mastery of human behavior could be as powerful as mastery of logistics or weaponry. The ability to navigate these pressures quietly and efficiently became a defining characteristic of the Corsican Connection. In a world where exposure could mean loss, imprisonment, or worse, the smugglers' calm, calculated approach to law enforcement allowed them to operate confidently, maintaining both secrecy and influence. This balance between caution and assertiveness, invisibility and control, set the stage for further expansion and consolidation, ensuring that the Corsican network would endure both scrutiny and competition for years to come. As the Corsican Connection's operations became increasingly sophisticated, the focus inevitably shifted toward consolidation and control. It was no longer sufficient merely to move goods and maintain alliances. The network had to be structured in a way that ensured long-term stability and influence. The Corsicans approached this challenge with the same methodical patience and strategic foresight that had characterized every stage of their development. They began to map their operations comprehensively, creating layered systems of oversight, contingency, and coordination that transformed the organization from a collection of independent smugglers into a cohesive, resilient enterprise. Central to this process was the formalization of roles and responsibilities. While early operations had relied on flexibility and improvisation, the increasing complexity of shipments and alliances demanded clear accountability. Key individuals were entrusted with oversight of logistics, ensuring that goods moved according to plan and that alternative routes were available in case of disruption. Others managed communications, overseeing the flow of intelligence, monitoring rival activity, and maintaining secure channels with allies. Each role was carefully defined, with performance monitored and evaluated, creating a structure that combined discipline with adaptability. This formalization extended beyond internal organization to relationships with external parties. Alliances with other criminal groups, suppliers, and peripheral collaborators were nurtured and codified, often through a combination of implicit agreements, favors, and subtle enforcement of loyalty. The Corsicans understood that trust was a fragile commodity, and they developed methods to reinforce it systematically. Small acts of assistance, timely interventions, and consistent reliability built a foundation of credibility that made partners dependent on the Corsicans' expertise and discretion. At the same time, any signs of unreliability or opportunism were quietly addressed, preserving the integrity of the network. Strategic planning became a daily practice. The Corsicans routinely evaluated the efficiency of routes, the reliability of intermediaries, and the potential vulnerabilities of both internal operations and external threats. Anticipation was key. By projecting future developments and potential disruptions, they were able to adjust operations proactively. Seasonal variations, law enforcement patterns, and rival movements were all considered, with contingency plans developed for every plausible scenario. This level of foresight ensured that the network could function smoothly even in the face of unexpected challenges, minimizing risk and maintaining profitability. The expansion of control also required the Corsicans to manage information as a core asset. Intelligence on rival operations, law enforcement activity, and potential opportunities was carefully collected, analyzed, and disseminated within the network. Decisions were guided not by speculation but by observation and analysis, with every piece of information evaluated for reliability and relevance. By integrating information management into the operational framework, the Corsicans created a system in which knowledge flowed efficiently and securely, allowing for rapid, informed responses to emerging challenges. Security and secrecy remained paramount. As operations expanded into multiple cities and involved larger shipments, the potential consequences of exposure grew exponentially. Hidden warehouses, secure transport methods, and discreet communication channels were continually refined. Even the most mundane activities, such as the transfer of goods from one location to another, were approached with caution, timing, and precision, minimizing the risk of detection. Security protocols were ingrained, practiced, and reinforced consistently, forming a cultural backbone that underpinned the network's success. Financial management became an equally crucial component of consolidation. Profits were carefully allocated, balancing immediate operational needs with long-term investments in infrastructure, alliances, and security. The Corsicans understood that wealth alone was not sufficient, it had to be strategically deployed to maintain influence and ensure continuity. Investments in reliable personnel, transportation, and contingency measures allowed the network to operate efficiently while safeguarding against disruption. This disciplined approach to finances reinforced both stability and growth, enabling the Corsican Connection to strengthen its position across the French underworld. Psychological strategy was applied alongside logistical and financial control. The Corsicans cultivated an aura of calm authority, projecting competence and reliability that influenced both allies and competitors. Their quiet confidence reassured partners and intimidated rivals, often without overt displays of force. Subtle demonstrations of expertise, discretion, and foresight reinforced the perception of an organization that was not only skilled but strategically invincible. In this way, psychological influence became a force multiplier, allowing the Corsicans to expand control without unnecessary confrontation. The Corsicans also implemented methods to ensure redundancy and resilience. Multiple safe houses, alternative routes, and backup communication channels were established, creating layers of security that allowed operations to continue even under pressure or disruption. This approach reflected a deep understanding of risk management, acknowledging that no system, however well designed, was entirely immune to challenge. By building flexibility into every aspect of the network, the Corsicans ensured that setbacks could be absorbed without catastrophic consequences, maintaining both operational continuity and credibility. Leadership within the organization became a blend of mentorship, oversight, and strategic guidance. Experienced operators guided new recruits, imparting knowledge, skills, and cultural norms essential to maintaining the network standards. At the same time, leaders monitored performance, ensuring that discipline, discretion, and competence were upheld. This combination of guidance and accountability created an environment in which loyalty, skill, and reliability were cultivated systematically, reinforcing the foundation of a stable and enduring network. As the Corsicans consolidated power, the distinction between smuggling and strategic dominance became increasingly clear. The network was no longer merely a means of transporting goods, it was a carefully orchestrated enterprise in which logistics, intelligence, alliances, security, and psychology intersected seamlessly. Each element was interconnected, creating a resilient system capable of enduring scrutiny, competition, and disruption. Success was measured not only in profit but in the ability to maintain influence, stability, and adaptability across an increasingly complex criminal landscape. Ultimately, this period of consolidation marked the transformation of the Corsican Connection from a group of skilled smugglers into a structured, enduring power. Their operations combined discipline, foresight, intelligence, and subtle psychological influence, creating a network that could function reliably under pressure and adapt to changing circumstances. By formalizing roles, managing information, reinforcing alliances, and embedding resilience into every operation, the Corsicans established a foundation that would support expansion, dominance, and longevity, cementing their position as a formidable presence within the French underworld. As the Corsican Connection solidified its dominance, the focus inevitably turned toward managing rivalries and consolidating territory. Operating in the shadowed corners of the French underworld meant that competition was constant, subtle, and often dangerous. Other criminal factions, local syndicates, opportunistic gangs, and long-established underworld figures, were acutely aware of the Corsicans' growing influence, and many viewed their expansion with suspicion, envy, or outright hostility. The challenge was clear: to maintain operational control, the Corsicans would need to navigate conflicts with precision, balancing negotiation, strategic alliances, and, when necessary, calculated displays of force. Observation and intelligence continued to play a pivotal role in managing these rivalries. The Corsicans monitored their competitors carefully, tracking movements, alliances, and shipments. Each interaction, each pattern of behavior, provided valuable information about intentions, capabilities, and vulnerabilities. Couriers, intermediaries, and trusted allies acted as the eyes and ears of the network, quietly gathering insights that allowed leaders to anticipate potential challenges before they escalated. This intelligence was systematically analyzed, forming the basis for strategic decisions about territorial expansion, alliance building, and risk mitigation. Negotiation became a refined skill, essential for maintaining peace and maximizing opportunities. Corsican leaders understood that confrontation was costly, often destabilizing, and sometimes unnecessary. Instead, they cultivated relationships with rival factions through careful diplomacy, offering mutually beneficial arrangements that preserved operational freedom while establishing respect and influence. These negotiations were rarely public or dramatic. They were quiet, calculated interactions, conducted in the back rooms of cafés, along dimly lit alleys, or through trusted intermediaries. Every word, gesture, and subtle implication carried weight, reflecting a deep understanding of human behavior and social dynamics. At the same time, the Corsicans were not naive. They recognized that some rivals could not be persuaded or controlled through diplomacy alone. In these cases, strategic pressure, intimidation, or targeted disruption became necessary tools. Yet even these actions were measured, designed to assert dominance without attracting undue attention from law enforcement or destabilizing alliances. A sabotaged shipment, a subtly redirected route, or a quiet warning could convey authority more effectively than overt violence. This careful calibration of power reinforced their reputation as operators who combined skill, discretion, and strategic foresight. Territorial management required both psychological acuity and operational precision. Corsicans understood that control was not solely about physical presence, it was also about perception and influence. Allies and rivals alike needed to recognize the network's capability, reach, and reliability. Symbolic actions, such as coordinated displays of organization, discreet interventions in disputes, or well-timed demonstrations of operational competence, served to reinforce authority without provoking open confrontation. By shaping perceptions, the Corsicans could extend influence, stabilize contested regions, and subtly deter challenges to their dominance. The management of alliances was equally critical. As the network expanded, relationships with other criminal factions became increasingly complex. Corsicans had to maintain trust, balance competing interests, and ensure that alliances remained functional under pressure. Small acts of loyalty, reliable execution of joint operations, and the careful exchange of information strengthened bonds while fostering dependence on the Corsican network. Conversely, any hint of betrayal, opportunism, or unreliability was addressed quietly but decisively, reinforcing the discipline and standards that underpinned the organization's strength. Conflict resolution often relied on a combination of subtle manipulation and strategic foresight. The Corsicans anticipated rival responses, adjusting tactics to minimize risk and maximize advantage. A seemingly minor concession could prevent escalation, while a carefully timed show of competence could discourage future challenges. In every case, the goal was to maintain operational stability, preserve alliances, and protect the network's long-term interests. This strategic approach demonstrated that dominance in the underworld was as much a product of intellect and patience as it was of action or aggression. Surveillance and counter-surveillance were integrated into these efforts. Corsicans not only monitored rivals but also ensured that their own movements, intentions, and strategies remained concealed. Trust was carefully calibrated, with information shared only on a need-to-know basis and communication carefully coded. Even routine activities were executed with attention to minimizing exposure, creating a network that was resilient, adaptable, and secure. This disciplined approach allowed the Corsican Connection to operate confidently in contested spaces, navigating rivalries without compromising operational integrity. The psychological dimension of territorial control cannot be overstated. By maintaining an aura of calm authority, strategic foresight, and operational competence, the Corsicans influenced both allies and competitors subtly but profoundly. Allies were reassured, rivals were cautious, and observers underestimated the network's true reach. This subtle form of dominance, based on reputation and perception rather than overt force, allowed the Corsicans to extend influence efficiently and sustainably, shaping the underworld according to their strategic vision. Expansion into contested territories also highlighted the importance of contingency planning. The Corsicans understood that unforeseen events, law enforcement raids, rival incursions, or internal errors, could threaten stability. Multiple safe routes, backup couriers, and alternative alliances were maintained to absorb disruptions. This redundancy ensured continuity of operations, allowing the network to maintain control even under pressure. Resilience, flexibility, and foresight became hallmarks of the Corsican approach, reinforcing their ability to manage rivalries effectively while preserving long-term influence. Ultimately, the management of rivalries and territories reflected the Corsican Connection's evolution from skilled smugglers into strategic operators. Their success was not determined by brute force alone but by a sophisticated blend of observation, intelligence, diplomacy, psychological acuity, and contingency planning. By understanding human behavior, anticipating challenges, and acting with measured precision, the Corsicans were able to navigate a complex, competitive environment with remarkable effectiveness. Their dominance was thus both quiet and enduring, built on careful orchestration rather than spectacle or overt confrontation. This period of strategic territorial management further solidified the Corsican Connection's reputation within the French underworld. Allies and competitors alike came to recognize the network's ability to combine operational efficiency with subtle influence, creating a system that was resilient, adaptable, and disciplined. Through intelligence, negotiation, strategic intervention, and careful psychological calibration, the Corsicans maintained control, mitigated threats, and expanded influence, setting the stage for the next phase of their operations, a period of unprecedented consolidation and near unrivaled dominance across key regions of France. As the Corsican Connection's influence deepened, the network began to explore new avenues of operation that went beyond the traditional smuggling of goods. The organization recognized that diversification was essential not only for increasing profits but also for reducing vulnerability. By expanding into multiple forms of enterprise, they could insulate themselves against disruptions, whether from law enforcement, rival factions, or economic fluctuations. This strategic expansion required careful planning, meticulous observation, and disciplined execution, ensuring that each new venture was integrated seamlessly into the existing framework of operations. Financial enterprises became an increasingly important focus. The Corsicans understood that raw cash flow, while essential, could be dangerous if handled carelessly. Banks, money laundering operations, and legitimate fronts were used to convert smuggling profits into sustainable assets. These financial structures allowed the network to invest in infrastructure, pay trusted allies, and maintain reserves for unexpected challenges. Every transaction was meticulously managed, with careful attention to secrecy and legitimacy, reinforcing the impression of ordinary commerce while preserving operational security. In addition to financial diversification, the Corsicans explored the movement of other high-value goods beyond traditional contraband. Luxury items, restricted commodities, and rare materials became part of their operations, each requiring specialized handling, careful timing, and discreet channels of distribution. Expertise in logistics, learned over years of smuggling, allowed the network to move these goods efficiently and securely. Each expansion reinforced their reputation for precision and discretion, attracting both collaborators and the wary attention of competitors. Operational sophistication also demanded enhanced internal coordination. Multiple teams were tasked with managing overlapping areas of responsibility, each with defined roles and communication channels. Logistics, intelligence, finance, and security were synchronized to minimize risk and maximize efficiency. Planning sessions, often conducted in quiet, secure locations, allowed leaders to assess threats, review ongoing operations, and anticipate opportunities. Every decision was weighed carefully, ensuring that the network could adapt quickly to changing circumstances without compromising integrity or security. Communication remained a cornerstone of this diversification. The Corsicans refined codes, signals, and protocols to maintain The flow of information across the network. Trusted intermediaries conveyed messages with precision, while secure drop points and prearranged schedules ensured that critical intelligence reached the right individuals without exposure. This emphasis on communication allowed the network to operate seamlessly across multiple sectors, maintaining cohesion while expanding influence and operational capacity. The human element remained central to success. Recruitment, training, and oversight were applied rigorously to maintain competence and loyalty. New members were carefully evaluated, inducted gradually, and monitored closely to ensure that skills, discretion, and reliability met the organization's exacting standards. Mentorship and guidance reinforced the cultural norms that had been cultivated since the Corsicans' earliest operations: patience, observation, loyalty, and strategic foresight. This disciplined approach ensured that expansion did not compromise the cohesion or security of the network. Managing relationships with external partners became increasingly complex. Collaborations with other criminal factions, suppliers, and legitimate businesses required diplomacy, negotiation, and sometimes subtle pressure. The Corsicans skillfully balanced incentives and accountability, ensuring that alliances remained productive without creating dependencies that could be exploited. This careful management of partnerships allowed the network to expand its reach while minimizing exposure, creating a web of influence that extended into multiple layers of the underworld. Security considerations intensified with each new venture. Larger operations, higher value goods, and broader alliances introduced new vulnerabilities. Hidden storage facilities, alternative transport routes, and contingency plans became standard practice, ensuring that disruption or betrayal would not cripple the organization. The Corsicans cultivated a culture of vigilance, where every participant understood the importance of operational security and the consequences of lapses. This shared understanding created an environment of disciplined cooperation, essential for the successful management of complex, high-stakes ventures. The psychological dimension of expansion was carefully cultivated. Reputation and perception were critical tools for maintaining influence and discouraging interference. By projecting competence, calm authority, and operational mastery, the Corsicans reinforced confidence among allies and caution among rivals. Subtle displays of reliability, efficiency, and strategic foresight conveyed power without overt confrontation, allowing the network to expand its operations while minimizing resistance or scrutiny. Strategic foresight also played a role in risk mitigation. The Corsicans anticipated regulatory changes, law enforcement activity, and potential market fluctuations, integrating this awareness into operational planning. By remaining proactive rather than reactive, they minimized exposure to disruption and positioned themselves to capitalize on emerging opportunities. This approach reflected a disciplined, analytical mindset, treating expansion not as opportunistic improvisation but as a carefully orchestrated process aligned with long-term objectives. Every expansion, every new operation, was approached with patience. Corsicans understood that rapid growth without careful integration could destabilize the network. Each new enterprise was phased in gradually, with lessons learned from previous operations applied to minimize errors and reinforce security. This methodical approach ensured that the organization could scale effectively without compromising its core values, operational integrity, or strategic advantages. The integration of financial, logistical, and operational strategies created a self-reinforcing system. Profits funded expansion, expansion required coordination, and coordination reinforced control and security. Intelligence, human management, and psychological strategy were interwoven with tangible operations, creating a network that was both resilient and adaptable. By managing complexity with precision, the Corsicans elevated their operations from mere smuggling to sophisticated, multi-layered enterprise, capable of enduring scrutiny, competition, and environmental pressures. Ultimately, this phase of diversification solidified the Corsican Connection as a highly adaptable and resilient organization. By expanding operations thoughtfully and strategically, they minimized vulnerabilities, enhanced influence, and reinforced cohesion. Logistics, intelligence, finance, security, and human management were seamlessly integrated, forming a network capable of thriving under pressure. The Corsicans had transformed their operations from tactical smuggling into strategic enterprise, positioning themselves for enduring dominance and influence within the French underworld, a legacy built on foresight, discipline, and relentless attention to detail. As the Corsican Connection's operations matured, attention turned towards solidifying influence in urban centers, where control over distribution networks could yield both strategic advantage and financial gain. Cities presented a different set of challenges compared to rural or coastal smuggling routes. The urban environment was densely populated, highly visible, and teeming with law enforcement scrutiny, rival factions, and civilian observers. To navigate this complexity, the Corsicans relied on a combination of discipline, subtlety, and strategic foresight, transforming the city into an environment that could be monitored, managed, and subtly influenced without overt displays of power. Observation became the foundation of their urban strategy. Members of the network studied the rhythms of the city with meticulous attention, the ebb and flow of crowds, the timing of patrols, the movement of goods and services. Every detail, from the placement of streetlights to the scheduling of deliveries, was noted and analyzed. This intelligence allowed the Corsicans to predict patterns, identify optimal routes for shipments, and anticipate potential challenges before they could escalate. The city, with all its apparent chaos, became a structured landscape that could be navigated with precision, turning unpredictability into opportunity. Alliances with local operators became essential. Urban centers were hubs of commerce, both legal and illicit, and the Corsicans understood that collaboration with existing networks could enhance efficiency and reduce exposure. These relationships were carefully cultivated through discretion, reliability, and mutual benefit. Allies were provided with opportunities, protection, or timely information, reinforcing dependence on the Corsican network. In return, the organization gained access to infrastructure, labor, and intelligence that would have been difficult to secure independently. Trust was maintained through consistent execution and subtle reinforcement of loyalty, creating a stable framework for urban operations. Logistical innovation played a central role. The movement of goods within a city required creative solutions to avoid detection and interference. Hidden compartments, decoy shipments, and carefully coordinated delivery schedules became standard practice. The Corsicans adapted traditional smuggling techniques to the urban landscape, using alleys, back entrances, and inconspicuous vehicles to transport high-value items discreetly. Each operation was rehearsed and timed with precision, ensuring that the network could function efficiently without attracting unnecessary attention. This careful orchestration reflected both ingenuity and discipline, hallmarks of the Corsican approach. Security protocols were rigorously maintained. In densely populated areas, even minor mistakes could draw scrutiny or compromise operations. The Corsicans implemented multiple layers of protection, secure communication channels, observation posts, redundant transport routes, and discrete storage locations. Each element was designed to absorb potential disruptions, ensuring that the network could continue functioning even under pressure. Participants were trained to maintain composure, follow protocols meticulously, and recognize potential threats before they materialized. This culture of vigilance created an operational environment that was resilient, adaptive, and remarkably controlled. Psychological influence became increasingly important in urban settings. The Corsicans cultivated an aura of quiet authority, projecting competence, calm, and strategic insight in all interactions. Allies felt reassured, rivals were subtly deterred, and observers underestimated the organization's true reach. Small, deliberate actions, a discreet intervention in a dispute, the timely execution of an operation, or a consistent display of reliability, reinforced the perception of dominance without drawing overt attention. This psychological strategy allowed the Corsicans to shape behavior and expectations, extending influence efficiently and sustainably across complex urban networks. Conflict management required both subtlety and precision. Urban environments were rife with potential friction, from territorial disputes to competition over resources. The Corsicans approached these challenges through negotiation, strategic concessions, and careful demonstration of authority. Confrontation was avoided when possible, Instead, influence was exerted through reputation, foresight, and calculated interventions. By understanding human behavior and anticipating responses, the Corsicans minimized risk while reinforcing control. Every interaction was an opportunity to consolidate influence and stabilize operations without provoking escalation. The integration of intelligence, logistics, and psychology became evident in urban expansion. Information gathered from observation, allies, and intermediaries guided operational decisions, ensuring that shipments, personnel, and communications were coordinated seamlessly. Logistics ensured timely and discreet movement, while psychological strategy reinforced authority and deterred interference. These elements worked in concert, creating a system in which complexity was managed efficiently and risk was minimized. The Corsican Connection's urban operations became a testament to the power of strategy, foresight, and disciplined execution. Redundancy and contingency planning were central to resilience. Alternate routes, backup storage locations, and secure communication channels ensured that disruptions could be absorbed without compromising the network. Law enforcement raids, rival incursions, or unforeseen accidents were anticipated, with protocols in place to maintain operational continuity. This layered approach reflected a deep understanding of urban risk dynamics and demonstrated the Corsicans' commitment to long-term stability over short-term gains. Expansion into the city also highlighted the Corsicans' adaptability. Techniques and strategies developed in coastal and rural operations were modified for urban contexts, illustrating the organization's capacity for innovation and evolution. Each success reinforced the network's reputation, strengthened internal cohesion, and attracted reliable partners. Over time, the Corsican Connection became a dominant, yet discreet, presence in urban centers, capable of managing complexity, mitigating threats, and coordinating operations with remarkable precision. Ultimately, the urban expansion phase marked a critical stage in the evolution of the Corsican Connection. By blending observation, alliance building, logistical innovation, psychological influence, and rigorous security, the organization transformed densely populated cities into controlled operational landscapes. The network's influence was quiet but pervasive, its authority subtle but undeniable. This period of strategic urban integration not only enhanced profitability but also reinforced resilience, adaptability, and cohesion, laying the groundwork for continued dominance and long-term stability within the French underworld. By the time the Corsican Connection had firmly established itself in urban centers, the organization began to understand that influence extended beyond operations and logistics. It was equally about reputation, perception, and psychological dominance. In the underworld, power was as much a matter of how others viewed you as what you could physically accomplish. Every action, every interaction, and every carefully orchestrated operation contributed to a narrative that reinforced authority and deterred challenges. The Corsicans recognized that cultivating this perception required patience, subtlety, and strategic planning, and they approached it with the same methodical precision that had guided their expansion from the islands to the mainland. Observation remained the cornerstone of this psychological strategy. The Corsicans studied not only the behavior of rivals and allies but also the perceptions of outsiders, local merchants, workers, and even casual passers-by. Each interaction was evaluated for its potential to strengthen or weaken the network's influence. Subtle cues, such as a carefully timed intervention in a dispute or the reliable execution of a shipment despite obstacles, communicated competence and reliability without overtly asserting power. In a world where overt displays could attract unnecessary scrutiny, quiet, calculated actions proved far more effective in reinforcing authority. Reputation management became an art form. The Corsicans understood that perception could shape behavior just as effectively as direct action. Allies were reassured by consistent reliability, clear communication, and demonstrable competence, cultivating loyalty without the need for coercion. Rivals, in contrast, were influenced by the network's demonstrated ability to anticipate challenges and respond strategically. A missed opportunity, a failed shipment, or a visible error could invite scrutiny, while the careful orchestration of successes reinforced respect and caution. Every detail contributed to an invisible but powerful web of influence that extended far beyond immediate operations. The Corsicans also recognized the importance of subtle deterrence. Physical force was always a last resort, employed only when absolutely necessary, yet the network maintained a quiet aura of capability that discouraged interference. Through carefully calculated acts, such as intercepting a rival's shipment without confrontation or providing just enough support to a partner to ensure dependency, the Corsicans communicated strength indirectly. This approach minimized risk while reinforcing authority, allowing the organization to control outcomes without attracting the attention or scrutiny that overt aggression often provoked. Internal culture played a crucial role in sustaining this psychological dominance. Members of the network were trained to act with composure, precision, and discretion, reinforcing the organization's reputation externally. Leadership emphasized patience, observation, and the strategic management of both people and operations. Recruits learned that reliability, attention to detail, and disciplined execution were as valuable as physical prowess or boldness. This cultural foundation created a workforce that not only executed orders efficiently but also projected the calm authority that underpinned the Corsicans' reputation. Information management was tightly integrated into the strategy of influence. Intelligence gathered on rivals, allies, and operational environments was analyzed to anticipate behavior, identify vulnerabilities, and optimize responses. By understanding patterns and motivations, the Corsicans could subtly shape outcomes in their favor. Decisions were rarely impulsive, they were guided by observation, careful consideration, and a deep understanding of human behavior. In this way, knowledge itself became a form of power, enabling the network to act preemptively and maintain control across diverse and complex contexts. Strategic communication reinforced psychological influence. Codes, signals, and discrete interactions ensured that instructions, information, and reassurances flowed efficiently throughout the network. Allies received timely guidance, rivals received carefully calibrated warnings, and internal cohesion was maintained. Communication was both functional and symbolic, demonstrating competence and reliability while shaping perceptions across multiple layers of the underworld. Every exchange, however minor, was part of a larger narrative that projected authority, discipline, and strategic insight. The management of perception extended to relationships with the broader environment, including legitimate businesses and local communities. The Corsicans recognized that influence was enhanced by appearing unthreatening or ordinary, reducing the likelihood of interference from law enforcement or civic authorities. Through subtle gestures, selective support, and careful integration into the social fabric, the organization maintained operational freedom while cultivating a reputation for reliability and discretion. This quiet integration allowed the Corsicans to operate under the radar, maintaining control without attracting unnecessary attention. Risk mitigation was always a consideration. Any display of influence had to be balanced against potential exposure or backlash. Contingency plans, alternative strategies, and secure communication channels were maintained to absorb potential disruptions. By anticipating reactions, evaluating consequences, and preparing responses, the Corsicans minimized vulnerability while maximizing authority. This disciplined approach reflected a sophisticated understanding of power as a blend of perception, action, and strategic foresight rather than brute force alone. Ultimately, this phase of psychological consolidation transformed the Corsican Connection from a network of skilled operators into a dominant force characterized by quiet, pervasive influence. Authority was communicated not through violence or spectacle but through precision, reliability, and subtle control over perception. Allies trusted and depended on the network, rivals were cautious and respectful, and the broader environment recognized the organization's competence and strategic foresight. Through patience, observation, and deliberate action, the Corsicans created a foundation of influence that extended far beyond immediate operations, securing their long-term position within the French underworld and reinforcing the enduring power of calculated, disciplined authority. As the Corsican Connection's influence extended across multiple regions, the network faced an inevitable challenge: internal cohesion. Expansion had brought new recruits, additional responsibilities, and more complex operations, each layer adding potential friction or vulnerability. Maintaining unity required more than authority, it required a carefully cultivated culture of loyalty, discipline, and mutual respect. The Corsicans understood that even the most disciplined operations could falter if trust and cohesion were compromised, and so attention to internal relationships became as crucial as logistical and strategic considerations. Recruitment was approached with meticulous care. New members were not accepted based solely on skill or ambition but on a combination of reliability, temperament, and alignment with the network's cultural values. Observations of behavior, subtle tests of discretion, and recommendations from trusted insiders were used to evaluate candidates. This rigorous selection process ensured that each new member could be trusted to act in the organization's best interests, reducing the risk of internal leaks, mistakes, or conflicts that could threaten operations or reputation. Training reinforced both skills and culture. Recruits were gradually introduced to operational responsibilities, mentored by experienced members who emphasized the values of patience, observation, and strategic foresight. Lessons were delivered quietly, often through practical exercises rather than formal instruction, allowing new members to absorb not only technical skills but also the subtle psychological principles that guided the Corsican Connection. By embedding cultural norms alongside operational expertise, the organization ensured that cohesion extended beyond obedience to a shared understanding of priorities, methods, and expectations. Trust building was an ongoing process. Loyalty could not be demanded, it had to be earned and reinforced. The Corsicans employed a combination of mentorship, consistent execution of responsibilities, and subtle recognition of reliability to strengthen bonds within the network. Successes were shared and celebrated in understated ways, while mistakes were addressed discreetly and constructively. This approach nurtured commitment, instilled confidence, and fostered a sense of collective purpose that transcended individual ambition. Internal communication was carefully managed to maintain cohesion. Clear channels, secure protocols, and structured updates ensured that members remained informed without overwhelming or confusing them. Instructions were precise, timelines coordinated, and contingencies explained, allowing each participant to understand their role within the larger framework. At the same time, communication reinforced trust and mutual accountability, as each member could see the network functioning reliably and predictably, reinforcing confidence in leadership and in peers. Conflict resolution was subtle but decisive. Even in disciplined networks, disagreements or friction could arise. The Corsicans addressed these moments quietly, analyzing the underlying causes and applying solutions that preserved relationships and operational integrity. Direct confrontation was avoided unless absolutely necessary. Instead, mediation, subtle guidance, and structured interventions were employed to restore harmony. By managing conflicts without creating division or resentment, the organization maintained cohesion while reinforcing norms of loyalty, discretion, and mutual responsibility. Psychological reinforcement of loyalty extended to both rewards and accountability. Members who demonstrated reliability, foresight, and discretion were entrusted with greater responsibilities and recognized in quiet, meaningful ways that underscored their importance. Conversely, errors, breaches of trust, or signs of disloyalty were addressed swiftly but proportionately, often through subtle corrective measures rather than overt punishment. This careful balance cultivated a culture in which discipline, loyalty, and competence were respected and internalized, ensuring that the network remained cohesive even under pressure. Mentorship played a crucial role in sustaining internal cohesion. Experienced members guided newer recruits not only in operational skills but also in judgment, discretion, and strategic thinking. This transfer of knowledge reinforced both capability and culture, embedding the values that had shaped the Corsican Connection since its inception. Mentorship also created personal bonds, reinforcing loyalty through relationships that extended beyond formal hierarchy, further strengthening cohesion and stability. Redundancy in personnel and knowledge management enhanced resilience. Members were trained in multiple roles, and operational knowledge was distributed carefully to ensure that the network could continue functioning smoothly even if key individuals were unavailable. This approach minimized dependence on any single person, reduced vulnerability, and fostered a sense of shared responsibility, reinforcing both cohesion and operational continuity. Strategic patience was applied to internal growth. Expansion was paced to ensure that new members and new operations could be integrated without overwhelming existing structures. Each addition was considered carefully in terms of cultural fit, operational value, and potential impact on cohesion. By managing growth deliberately, the Corsicans avoided the pitfalls of overextension and preserved the stability that was essential for long-term success. The Corsicans also emphasized discretion as a core principle of internal cohesion. Members were trained to maintain operational secrecy not only externally but also in their interactions within the network. Trust was reinforced by consistent adherence to confidentiality, careful observation of protocol, and mutual accountability. This discipline ensured that information, decisions, and responsibilities flowed efficiently while protecting the organization from internal compromise or inadvertent exposure. Ultimately, this phase of internal consolidation transformed the Corsican Connection into a network that was disciplined, loyal, and resilient. Cohesion was reinforced through careful recruitment, mentorship, training, strategic communication, subtle conflict resolution, and a culture that valued loyalty, discretion, and competence. Members trusted both leadership and peers, operations flowed smoothly, and the organization maintained stability even as it expanded into increasingly complex ventures. By cultivating unity alongside skill and foresight, the Corsicans ensured that their network was not only effective but enduring, capable of withstanding both internal and external challenges while preserving the strategic advantage that had defined their rise. By the time the Corsican Connection had perfected both internal cohesion and urban influence, the organization began to recognize that true dominance required careful navigation of law enforcement scrutiny. Operating in multiple regions, moving valuable goods, and maintaining alliances inevitably attracted attention, yet the Corsicans approached this challenge with the same methodical patience that had guided every stage of their rise. Their success was not built on recklessness or brash confrontation but on subtlety, foresight, and disciplined adaptation to an environment in which every misstep could carry significant consequences. Observation became a tool of survival. Members of the network continuously monitored the presence, behavior, and patterns of law enforcement across their territories. Routine patrols, seasonal shifts in focus, and investigative patterns were studied in detail, allowing the Corsicans to anticipate interventions and adjust operations accordingly. Couriers, allies, and strategically placed intermediaries acted as eyes and ears, gathering information that was analyzed systematically. This intelligence-driven approach allowed the organization to maintain operational fluidity while minimizing exposure, turning the threat of scrutiny into a manageable variable rather than an unpredictable danger. Secrecy was paramount. Every transaction, every shipment, and every communication was conducted with meticulous attention to discretion. Hidden compartments, alternate delivery routes, and discrete meeting points ensured that the flow of goods remained uninterrupted. The Corsicans understood that even minor lapses could attract scrutiny, so protocols were reinforced continuously, habits ingrained through repetition, and contingencies planned for every conceivable scenario. Operational discipline became second nature to the network, a shield against exposure and disruption. Financial subtlety complemented operational secrecy. Money laundering, layered transactions, and legitimate business fronts were employed to conceal the origins and destinations of funds. By integrating illicit gains into ordinary financial systems, the Corsicans minimized the risk of detection while maintaining liquidity for operational needs. Investments in legal enterprises also provided cover, social legitimacy, and additional revenue streams, demonstrating an understanding that financial acumen could be as vital to survival as tactical skill. Relationships with intermediaries and allies were managed with both diplomacy and caution. Trusted partners were essential for maintaining smooth operations, yet the Corsicans understood that loyalty was fragile and that external influence could jeopardize security. Subtle reinforcement of trust, careful delegation, and ongoing evaluation of reliability ensured that collaborators remained aligned with organizational objectives. At the same time, any signs of opportunism or compromise were addressed discreetly, maintaining both control and operational integrity. The psychological dimension of evasion was equally sophisticated. Corsicans cultivated an air of calm competence, projecting confidence and discretion to deter interference from both law enforcement and rival observers. Routine operations were executed smoothly and inconspicuously, minimizing the likelihood of drawing attention. Allies were reassured, rivals underestimated the organization, and outsiders were led to perceive normalcy where, in reality, a highly organized and adaptive network operated beneath the surface. This subtle manipulation of perception became a critical component of resilience and strategic security. Contingency planning extended to every facet of operation. Alternate routes, backup storage locations, and redundant communication channels ensured that the network could absorb unexpected disruptions without compromising overall functionality. The Corsicans anticipated raids, investigations, and surveillance, creating flexible protocols that allowed operations to continue seamlessly. Each plan was tested, refined, and implemented with quiet precision, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of risk management and operational resilience. Training in security awareness was integrated into every level of the organization. Members were instructed in the identification of potential threats, the recognition of surveillance patterns, and the maintenance of personal and operational discretion. Situational awareness became a constant practice, with every action, interaction, and movement conducted in light of potential observation. This disciplined approach ensured that operational security extended from leadership to the newest recruit, creating a cohesive culture in which risk was mitigated through collective vigilance. The Corsicans also employed selective legal navigation. By understanding the limits of law enforcement jurisdiction, procedural requirements, and investigative priorities, the network was able to exploit gaps and avoid unnecessary exposure. Legal knowledge was applied subtly, allowing operations to continue without provoking heightened scrutiny while simultaneously preparing for potential encounters with authorities. This strategic awareness reinforced resilience and demonstrated a sophisticated balance of caution and opportunism. Risk assessment was continuous and methodical. Every decision, whether a shipment, an alliance, or a financial maneuver, was evaluated in terms of potential exposure to law enforcement. Probability, impact, and contingency measures were considered, ensuring that actions were taken with full awareness of possible consequences. By integrating risk assessment into operational planning, the Corsicans reduced the likelihood of disruption while maintaining the freedom to act decisively when opportunities arose. Ultimately, this phase of law enforcement navigation transformed the Corsican Connection into an organization capable of operating in a complex and highly scrutinized environment with remarkable efficiency. By combining observation, secrecy, financial subtlety, strategic alliances, psychological influence, contingency planning, and risk assessment, the network minimized vulnerability while maximizing operational freedom. The Corsicans had learned to thrive not in spite of law enforcement oversight but by adapting intelligently to it, maintaining control, resilience, and continuity across multiple regions. The lessons of this period were profound. The organization had evolved beyond simple smuggling or territorial control. It had become a sophisticated, adaptive, and resilient network, capable of sustaining operations under pressure, mitigating threats proactively, and maintaining authority in a challenging environment. Law enforcement, while a constant presence, became a manageable variable rather than an existential threat, allowing the Corsicans to focus on long-term strategy, expansion, and the continued consolidation of power within the French underworld. With operational security secured and urban influence established, the Corsican Connection turned its attention to the delicate art of managing alliances with other criminal organizations. In the underworld, power was rarely absolute, dominance depended on relationships, mutual dependencies, and the careful balance of influence. Rival factions, local gangs, and even independent operators had their own interests, ambitions, and loyalties. The Corsicans understood that strategic partnerships were essential for extending reach, gaining intelligence, and coordinating operations, yet each alliance had to be approached with subtlety, foresight, and discipline. Observation remained central to alliance management. Before approaching potential partners, the Corsicans studied their behavior, network, and reputation. Every transaction, every interaction, and every choice made by prospective allies was scrutinized to determine reliability, motives, and potential vulnerabilities. Decisions were guided not by speculation but by careful analysis of patterns and outcomes. By understanding the human dynamics and operational tendencies of others, the Corsicans could identify those most likely to contribute to stability and mutual benefit while avoiding alliances that could introduce risk or compromise operational integrity. Negotiation was executed with patience and discretion. Agreements were rarely public or formalized through documents. Instead, they relied on mutual understanding, implicit trust, and the reinforcement of loyalty through action. The Corsicans offered opportunities, protection, and access to resources in exchange for cooperation, framing alliances as mutually beneficial rather than coercive. Every engagement was designed to strengthen interdependence while minimizing exposure or vulnerability. By aligning incentives carefully, the network could extend its influence without overextending its resources or provoking unnecessary conflict. Loyalty was cultivated through consistency and reliability. Allies were reassured by the Corsicans' predictable behavior, timely execution of commitments, and strategic foresight. By demonstrating competence and discretion, the network built a reputation that encouraged trust and discouraged opportunism. Subtle interventions, timely assistance, and unobtrusive demonstrations of capability reinforced bonds, ensuring that alliances remained functional and resilient even in the face of external pressures or internal disagreements. Psychological strategy was carefully applied. The Corsicans understood that influence often depended more on perception than on actual force. By projecting calm authority, strategic insight, and operational competence, they reassured allies and deterred rivals. Demonstrations of skill, precision, and foresight were subtle yet persuasive, establishing credibility and reinforcing the network's position. This psychological dimension complemented logistical and operational capabilities, creating a holistic approach to alliance management that combined competence with perception. Information sharing was strategic and selective. Allies were provided with intelligence that enhanced cooperation and operational efficiency while maintaining operational security. At the same time, sensitive information was carefully compartmentalized to prevent misuse or exposure. By controlling the flow of knowledge, the Corsicans ensured that alliances remained productive, reliable, and mutually reinforcing without compromising the integrity of the network. This disciplined approach to communication strengthened trust and reinforced cohesion across interconnected operations. Conflict mitigation within alliances required subtlety and foresight. Disagreements, misunderstandings, or competing ambitions could destabilize relationships, so the Corsicans employed careful interventions to manage tension. Negotiation, mediation, and the calibrated exercise of influence were used to resolve disputes quietly and efficiently. The goal was always to preserve operational harmony, reinforce shared objectives, and maintain the reliability of cooperative arrangements. By managing conflict proactively, the Corsicans reduced risk while enhancing the long-term resilience of alliances. Operational coordination was critical to alliance management. Joint ventures, cooperative logistics, and shared intelligence required careful synchronization. Schedules, routes, and responsibilities were planned with precision, ensuring that collaborative efforts proceeded smoothly without exposing vulnerabilities. By demonstrating the ability to coordinate complex operations effectively, the Corsicans reinforced credibility, built dependence, and strengthened the perceived value of their network as a partner of choice. Adaptability was essential. Alliances were dynamic, shaped by shifting circumstances, emerging opportunities, and evolving threats. The Corsicans monitored these changes closely, adjusting strategies, reallocating resources, and recalibrating commitments to maintain balance and influence. By remaining flexible yet disciplined, the network could preserve relationships and operational stability even as conditions shifted, ensuring that alliances continue to support long-term objectives rather than become liabilities. Ultimately, the careful cultivation of alliances extended the Corsican Connection's reach and influence beyond the limits of its own operations. By combining observation, strategic negotiation, psychological influence, selective information sharing, conflict mitigation, operational coordination, and adaptability, the network created a system of interconnected relationships that reinforced its power and resilience. Allies trusted the organization, rivals respected its competence, and the broader underworld recognized its strategic mastery. This phase of alliance management demonstrated that enduring dominance in the criminal world depended as much on subtle influence, foresight, and relational intelligence as it did on wealth, logistics, or force. Through these alliances, the Corsicans could operate more efficiently, gather critical intelligence, and reduce vulnerability to external threats. Mutual benefit, trust, and strategic foresight became the glue that bound these relationships, allowing the network to project authority over broader territories while maintaining the operational integrity and discretion that had defined its rise. In this way, alliances were not merely tactical arrangements but strategic instruments, essential to sustaining dominance, ensuring resilience, and shaping the long-term trajectory of the Corsican Connection within the French underworld. As the Corsican Connection reached the pinnacle of its operational sophistication, attention turned toward the challenge of maintaining long-term sustainability in an unpredictable environment. Growth, influence, and alliances were only as valuable as the network's ability to preserve itself over time. The underworld, by its nature, was dynamic, rife with opportunistic rivals, fluctuating markets, and the ever-present threat of law enforcement. The Corsicans understood that the stability of their empire depended not solely on past successes, but on the careful orchestration of future security, resilience, and adaptability. Strategic foresight became a guiding principle. The Corsicans continuously assessed emerging threats, including shifts in political climate, changes in law enforcement tactics, and the evolving ambitions of rival organizations. Every decision, from operational deployment to alliance management, was informed by a long-term perspective. By anticipating potential challenges and preparing multiple responses, the network could act proactively, preserving both influence and operational continuity even when circumstances changed unexpectedly. This foresight transformed potential vulnerabilities into manageable variables rather than existential risks. Internal resilience was cultivated alongside external influence. The organization maintained layered structures of leadership, communication, and operational oversight to absorb disruptions without compromising functionality. Key roles were redundantly trained, decision-making authority was distributed thoughtfully, and contingency plans were integrated into everyday procedures. Members were empowered with the knowledge and confidence to adapt when unexpected situations arose, creating a culture in which the network could continue to function smoothly under pressure. The Corsicans understood that resilience was as much psychological as structural, requiring both preparation and confidence across the organization. Financial stability remained a cornerstone of long-term security. Beyond generating revenue through smuggling and allied ventures, the Corsicans invested carefully in diversified portfolios, including legitimate enterprises and financial instruments designed to conceal illicit gains. These measures provided both liquidity and insulation against market fluctuations, rival interference, or law enforcement intervention. Wealth was not simply accumulated, it was managed strategically, providing the network with resources to maintain operations, secure alliances, and respond decisively to unforeseen challenges. Operational efficiency was continually refined. Processes that had proven effective were standardized and enhanced, while new technologies, routes, and methods were evaluated and integrated where appropriate. The Corsicans approached these refinements with patience and caution, ensuring that each adaptation complemented the existing network without introducing unnecessary risk. By continually optimizing operations, the organization increased both productivity and discretion, reinforcing stability and maintaining a reputation for competence that deterred rivals and reassured allies. The cultivation of reputation remained central to long-term dominance. Perception, carefully managed through discreet interventions, consistent reliability, and strategic displays of competence, continued to shape relationships across the underworld. Allies remained confident in the network's ability to deliver results, rivals were deterred by its precision, and observers underestimated the extent of its control. This subtle management of perception became an invisible yet powerful tool for sustaining influence, ensuring that the Corsican Connection could maintain authority without resorting to unnecessary confrontation or overt displays of power. Contingency planning was integrated into all aspects of operations. Multiple scenarios were envisioned and rehearsed, including sudden law enforcement interventions, internal disputes, and shifts in market conditions. Backup plans, alternative routes, and secure storage locations were maintained, ensuring that disruptions could be absorbed with minimal impact. This structured approach allowed the Corsicans to maintain operational continuity even under pressure, reinforcing resilience and enabling rapid, confident responses to emergent challenges. The human element was central to sustainability. Recruitment, training, and mentorship ensured that members were capable, loyal, and aligned with the organization's long-term objectives. Knowledge transfer was carefully managed, embedding both operational skills and cultural norms throughout the network. By cultivating competence and loyalty at every level, the Corsicans created a workforce capable of maintaining continuity, executing complex operations, and adapting to changing circumstances without undermining cohesion or security. Adaptability became a hallmark of the organization's longevity. The Corsicans recognized that static strategies could quickly become liabilities in a dynamic environment. By continually observing external trends, internal performance, and potential opportunities, the network could pivot when necessary, reallocating resources, adjusting alliances, or modifying operational tactics. This adaptability allowed the organization to thrive even as conditions shifted, demonstrating that enduring dominance depended as much on flexibility and foresight as on immediate power or wealth. Psychological strategy complemented operational resilience. Confidence, calm authority, and strategic foresight projected an image of stability that reassured allies and discouraged rivals. The Corsicans maintained an aura of control and competence, which in turn reinforced internal cohesion and facilitated smooth interactions across the network. By managing perception alongside practical measures, the organization created a dual layer of influence, visible and subtle, that enhanced long-term sustainability. Ultimately, this phase of strategic consolidation ensured that the Corsican Connection could withstand the pressures of growth, competition, and uncertainty. Through careful integration of foresight, resilience, financial management, operational refinement, alliance stability, adaptability, and psychological influence, the network positioned itself not merely as a dominant force in the present but as a sustainable and enduring entity. The Corsicans had transformed from skilled smugglers into masterful strategists, capable of navigating complexity, mitigating risk, and securing the long-term continuity of their empire. This period of careful orchestration marked the maturation of the Corsican Connection into a network that was not only efficient and powerful but also resilient, adaptable, and secure. The organization had developed the tools, protocols, and culture necessary to endure external pressures, internal challenges, and the unpredictable dynamics of the underworld. In doing so, it ensured that its influence would persist, its operations would remain coherent, and its legacy of strategic mastery would continue to shape the French criminal landscape for years to come. As the Corsican Connection entered its mature phase, the focus gradually shifted from daily operations to something deeper, legacy. The network had mastered routes, refined logistics, and secured influence, but its architects understood that power meant little if it could not endure beyond their generation. They began to ask a quiet, haunting question: how does an empire built in the shadows ensure it never fades into them? Knowledge preservation became their first concern. Years of lessons, hard-won through risks, losses, and success, could not be allowed to vanish with time. Mentors passed wisdom through stories and discreet instruction rather than written records. The Corsicans believed knowledge should live in people, not on paper. A young courier might learn the timing of tides from an older smuggler, while a mid-level manager absorbed the art of negotiation from a seasoned captain. It was an unbroken chain of practical education that carried not only skill, but also the philosophy of patience and precision that had defined the organization from the beginning. Mentorship became a silent ritual. New members were guided carefully through an unspoken hierarchy of lessons: when to speak, when to wait, and when to disappear. Every small decision, every conversation, was a chance to reinforce the Corsican code of conduct. Mistakes were corrected not with anger, but with quiet explanation. The goal was never to control minds, but to shape instincts, to make loyalty and discretion reflexive rather than commanded. Succession planning was equally deliberate. Potential leaders were identified years in advance and tested slowly, often without realizing it. A promising operative might be given control of a minor shipment and watched carefully, not for success, but for reaction. Would they panic under pressure? Could they maintain calm authority when things went wrong? Over time, these small trials revealed who possessed not just intelligence, but the emotional steadiness required to lead a network that survived on discipline and subtlety. To preserve the network spirit, cultural reinforcement was essential. The Corsicans knew that an empire held together by fear was destined to fracture. So instead of brute loyalty, they fostered belonging. Dinners, quiet toasts, and shared traditions reminded members that they were part of something older and larger than themselves. The organization was not just a machine for profit, it was a lineage, a living memory stretching back to the rocky shores of Corsica, to the first smugglers who had carried contraband under moonlit waves. Financial legacy was planned with equal precision. Profits were not merely hidden but invested, diversified, and layered across legitimate businesses. These investments became the foundation of long-term stability, assets that could sustain the network through changing times, shifting laws, and new rivals. In this way, money became a bridge between generations, ensuring that successors would inherit not only a name but the means to protect it. Perhaps the most delicate part of legacy was psychological. The Corsicans understood that reputation could outlive flesh and blood. Their aura of calm, controlled authority had to persist even when faces changed. To maintain this illusion of permanence, transitions were subtle. A new leader would step in quietly, decisions continuing without disruption. Outsiders rarely noticed the change. To them, the Corsican connection appeared timeless, almost institutional, its presence like the steady tide, always there, always moving, but never announcing itself. This sense of continuity became their true immortality. They had mastered the art of invisibility not just in operations but in time itself. While other criminal empires flared brightly and fell to infighting or betrayal, the Corsicans adapted, teaching each generation the same lesson, that survival depends on restraint. Patience was power. Silence was protection. Knowledge, shared carefully and remembered faithfully, was the truest currency of all. In the quiet years that followed, the original architects of the connection began to fade from daily involvement. They had built something self-sustaining, a living structure guided by memory, discipline, and quiet ambition. The young men they had mentored now ran routes, forged deals, and maintained relationships, never forgetting the invisible hands that had taught them. The Corsican Connection had become more than a smuggling network. It was now an organism, adaptive, intelligent, and enduring. Their legacy was not loud or dramatic. It was hidden in the efficiency of a well-timed exchange, the calm negotiation of a dispute, or the steady movement of goods across borders with no trace left behind. Every quiet success whispered of the discipline that had been passed down, of a network that had learned not just how to survive, but how to last. In the stillness of that longevity, the Corsican Connection achieved what few criminal organizations ever could: continuity without chaos, loyalty without fear, and power without arrogance. Their legacy lived in every silent transaction that bore their invisible mark, proof that in the underworld, true strength was not in domination, but in endurance. The final chapter of the Corsican Connection story is not merely one of operations, smuggling routes, and alliances, but a reflection on legacy, impact, and the subtle forces that sustained a criminal network long after the initial sparks of ambition ignited. By the time the organization had reached its height, it had transformed from a small, island-based group of smugglers into a highly sophisticated, multi-regional network capable of operating with precision, discretion, and strategic insight. The story of the Corsicans is a story of quiet mastery, patient accumulation of knowledge, and careful orchestration of both human and material resources, a story that demonstrates that in the underworld, as in any realm, true power is measured not by spectacle, but by enduring control. At the core of this enduring control was the interplay between meticulous planning and adaptive flexibility. The Corsicans had long understood that dominance in the underworld was not static, it was a dynamic balance between influence, perception, and operational capability. Every decision, from the timing of a shipment to the cultivation of an ally, was informed by a profound understanding of both immediate consequences and long-term implications. The network thrived not through reckless displays of force or ostentatious power, but through quiet competence, foresight, and an almost surgical attention to detail. This balance between calculated risk and strategic patience became a defining characteristic, ensuring that the organization could withstand internal turbulence, external threats, and the relentless pressures of a shifting criminal landscape. Financial ingenuity was a central pillar of the Corsican Connection's enduring influence. Smuggling operations, while lucrative, were only one component of a multifaceted economic strategy. Funds were carefully managed, diversified, and integrated into legitimate enterprises, creating layers of financial security that insulated the network from sudden disruptions. Investments in businesses, property, and financial instruments served multiple purposes. They provided cover for illicit activities, ensured liquidity for operational needs, and laid the groundwork for long-term wealth accumulation. In essence, money was treated not merely as a resource, but as a strategic instrument, capable of reinforcing alliances, consolidating influence, and securing the organization's future. The psychological dimension of legacy was equally vital. The Corsicans understood that perception shaped reality in ways as profound as physical control. Allies were reassured by calm, consistent authority, rivals were deterred by the organization's reputation for foresight and precision. Observers, both within and outside the criminal sphere, underestimated the subtle mastery that guided operations. Every action, whether a perfectly timed delivery, a discreet intervention in a territorial dispute, or a carefully executed negotiation, contributed to a perception of competence and control that transcended immediate operational outcomes. By sustaining this aura of authority, the Corsicans ensured that their influence would persist even as personnel changed and external conditions evolved. Operational discipline remained a cornerstone of the network's endurance. Protocols for communication, transportation, and contingency planning were standardized and internalized, allowing the organization to function with remarkable efficiency even under stress. Hidden routes, secure storage facilities, and redundant communication systems were maintained meticulously, ensuring that disruptions could be absorbed without compromising continuity. Each member, from the newest recruit to the most experienced operator, understood their role within a broader system, and this clarity of function reinforced both internal cohesion and external reliability. Alliances, carefully cultivated over decades, became one of the most enduring aspects of the Corsican legacy. Relationships with rival factions, independent operators, and cooperative partners were managed through a blend of trust, strategic negotiation, and selective information sharing. Each alliance was treated as a living entity, requiring attention, reinforcement, and adaptability. By maintaining these connections, the Corsicans could extend their influence far beyond the immediate reach of their own operations, ensuring that the network's authority was recognized across multiple regions and sectors of the underworld. The careful stewardship of alliances was not simply tactical, it was integral to the network's longevity and resilience. Mentorship and succession planning ensured that the organization's ethos and operational expertise could be transmitted across generations. Leaders identified potential successors early, guiding them through increasingly complex responsibilities while evaluating judgment, discretion, and competence. Knowledge transfer was deliberate and systematic, embedding both practical skills and the cultural values that defined the Corsican Connection. By cultivating new leaders who internalized the network's principles, the organization could continue to operate with the same precision and discretion that had characterized its rise, long after the original architects had stepped back or passed from the scene. Cultural cohesion, deeply embedded in the organization, provided stability even in turbulent times. Loyalty, discretion, patience, and strategic foresight were more than operational guidelines, they were the defining ethos of the Corsican network. Every member was socialized into this culture, through mentorship, daily routines, and subtle reinforcement of norms. Mistakes or breaches of trust were addressed discreetly yet decisively, ensuring that cohesion was maintained without unnecessary disruption. The cultural fabric of the organization acted as both a guide and a stabilizing force, allowing the network to endure even as external pressures fluctuated. The Corsicans' relationship with law enforcement was a study in calculated balance. Surveillance, raids, and investigations were treated as risks to be anticipated, managed, and, when possible, neutralized. By observing patterns, predicting responses, and maintaining operational discretion, the network reduced vulnerability while continuing to function efficiently. At the same time, subtle legal and financial maneuvering allowed the Corsicans to exploit procedural gaps, maintaining operational freedom without drawing overt attention. This careful navigation of external authority underscored the network's intelligence, patience, and strategic adaptability. Legacy also manifested in the subtleties of perception management. The Corsicans were acutely aware that reputation could sustain influence long after direct actions had ceased. Stories of precision, foresight, and reliability were shared quietly within the underworld, shaping expectations and behavior. Allies continued to trust, rivals hesitated, and the broader community recognized an aura of strategic competence. By nurturing this perception, the organization created an invisible network of influence that reinforced authority and operational stability, illustrating that in the underworld, legacy was as much about narrative and reputation as it was about tangible control. Adaptability remained central to endurance. Even at the height of their power, the Corsicans recognized that the criminal landscape was never static. Shifts in market demand, changes in law enforcement priorities, and evolving rival ambitions required continuous adjustment. The organization maintained flexibility through decentralized decision-making, redundancy in critical roles, and continuous observation of both internal and external conditions. This capacity for adaptation ensured that the network could respond to challenges without sacrificing cohesion, competence, or discretion. The human element of legacy, relationships, mentorship, trust, and loyalty, was cultivated with deliberate care. Leaders recognized that enduring influence required more than operational skill, it required the cultivation of human capital capable of sustaining the organization's ethos and expertise. By investing in people, nurturing loyalty, and reinforcing cultural norms, the Corsicans created a living, evolving network capable of enduring both internal changes and external pressures. The network's strength was not merely in its operations or wealth, but in the people who embodied its values and carried its knowledge forward. Financial continuity, operational excellence, cultural cohesion, psychological authority, alliance management, mentorship, and adaptability all converged to form a comprehensive blueprint for enduring influence. The Corsicans had built a network that was resilient, flexible, and capable of sustaining itself across decades. Every decision, every action, and every subtle intervention contributed to a structure designed not only for immediate success but for long-term survival and legacy. In reflecting upon the full arc of the Corsican Connection, one can observe that its enduring mastery was rooted in patience, foresight, and strategic orchestration. It was an organization that understood the value of preparation, the power of perception, and the importance of human and material networks. Its story illustrates that true dominance is rarely a matter of spectacle, it is built through quiet competence, disciplined execution, and a relentless focus on continuity and resilience. The Corsicans' empire was not flashy, but it was formidable, and it endured precisely because it balanced operational skill with cultural coherence, strategic foresight with flexibility, and immediate action with long-term planning. As the network's operations stabilized and its influence became deeply entrenched, the Corsican Connection achieved something remarkable. It created a legacy that would outlast individual leaders, withstand external threats, and continue to shape the French underworld in subtle but profound ways. It demonstrated that enduring power requires mastery of both tangible operations and intangible influence, that discretion and patience can achieve more than force and spectacle, and that a carefully cultivated culture can sustain an organization far beyond its founding members. In the quiet moments, long after the daily bustle of smuggling, negotiations, and alliances, the Corsican Connection remained a testament to strategic brilliance. Its story was not one of sudden victories or dramatic confrontations, but of careful observation, methodical planning, disciplined execution, and unwavering attention to both human and operational dynamics. Through meticulous orchestration, the organization achieved an enduring presence, a network whose influence, reputation, and operational mastery would echo quietly yet powerfully across decades, demonstrating that in the shadows of the underworld, true control is measured not by noise or spectacle, but by the subtle, persistent, and unyielding exercise of strategy, foresight, and disciplined authority. In this final analysis, the Corsican Connection emerges not simply as a criminal organization, but as an enduring study in human behavior, strategic foresight, and organizational mastery. Its story teaches that influence is cultivated over time, that power is maintained through discretion and cohesion, and that legacy is preserved through deliberate attention to people, culture, and systems. The Corsicans' mastery of these principles ensured that their network was not a fleeting phenomenon but a lasting presence, a shadowy testament to the enduring power of patience, intelligence, and calculated control in shaping the world, both seen and unseen.